This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 49 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Asen Bolstad of AB Pythons, all the way from Perth, Australia. So we're pretty much on the opposite sides of the world right now. What time is it over there in Perth?
It is 10:26 p.m.
Wow. Yeah, and over here it's 9 a.m. 9:26. So yeah, it's pretty far away, but yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you because you got some of the most mind-blowing wheat belt Stimsons I've ever seen. Their patterns are incredible. What else do you keep?
Thanks, mate. Yeah, I've got a number of different species. So I've got southwest carpet pythons, black-headed pythons. I've got Woma pythons. I've got common tree snakes as well. What else do I have? Southwest blackhead, stimmies. Should I say water pythons?
No, but we talked about that. But yeah,
we talked about that. I think that is about it from what I can recall off the top of my head.
Okay, and so what's it like over in Perth? Can you keep whatever you want, or is there like anything within Australia, or are there different regulations depending on where you live in Australia?
Yeah. So there's different regs. So we've got our own licensing system over here in WA or Western Australia, and so we've got two licensing categories as far as reptiles go for pet keepers. So we've got the category B license, which is where you can keep, most of your python species, bar olive pythons and rust-scaled pythons, and you've got a number of lizards and other things on the Cat B license as well. And then if you want to keep venomous, like your tiger snakes and your dugites, mulga snakes, all of that sort of thing, then you need a Cat C. But we can only keep, so here in WA, we can export snakes or lizards or reptiles over to the eastern states, but we can't import pythons in. So that's a definite no-no because of sunshine virus and nidovirus. So from a biosecurity perspective, but we can also import elapids though. So if there's, for example, like a St. George mulga, which is obviously the locale over east, we can import those to WA because we can keep mulgas on our license. So there's a little bit of leeway. I imported my some of my common phase tree snakes across from, I think it was Queensland, and yeah, so we're allowed those sorts of things, but it's quite tight as far as what we're allowed to keep. So there's a few guys working in the background amongst the hobby that are looking at obviously expanding the keepers list, and that looks like it's going ahead, which is exciting.
That is cool. So do you keep venomous?
I personally don't. So my wife says that's a no-no until the kids are older and they move out of home. So I've got to put the brakes on for that one. So no, all of mine, I've just got pythons and obviously the tree snakes being colubrids, but they're non-venomous colubrids. So I still go out herping and find all the goodies, but I just can't have them in the house. So which is fair enough with the kids, I suppose.
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned keeping a viper, a blue insularis. It's like my favorite viper. I brought it up to my wife, and I didn't anticipate the pushback that came my way.
They're awesome snakes.
Yeah, they're so cool. It's kind of difficult where I'm at in Florida. I think you need to get like 1,000 hours with that.
Wow.
Family. Yeah. And so it's almost an impossibility where I'm at because I'd have to find somebody with vipers and then get them to let me, work with their animals. So yeah, It's pretty difficult where I am. But I have it made in every other regard with boas and pythons and all that. But man, the wheat belts you have are just incredible. Are those like how long have those ones been bred in captivity? Like, do you know their lineage information?
Yeah, so I've got quite a number of different wheat belts that all come from Matthew Harris. So he's a big name breeder over here in WA. He's got some absolutely awesome stimmies. So he focuses mostly on stimmies. He bred blackheads for a while and carpets and blue tongues and all sorts of cool stuff. But his stimmies are just unbelievable. I've got a few of his animals from his lineages, so I'm not sure as far as where they're from on the wheat belt. I don't know exactly for those ones. Then I've got another particular line which are pure. Oh, I just got cramp in my hamstring. Sorry, mate.
Oh no.
So another line I've got a couple of wild caught females that were caught out towards the Mount Sterling area, which is like an area out in the wheat belt, a couple of hours east of Perth. And so they were found under a rock 50 metres apart from each other. And the actual original pair who produced some of the snakes that I've got, that the male and female were found under the same rock, and then the other female was found under a rock 50 metres apart, which I think is so neat because it's quite hard to get locale specific animals anymore.
That's super awesome.
Yeah.
So were you so like what is what's the legality surrounding collecting animals?
Yeah, so there used to be taker's license issued from DBCA, which are our kind of like department, well, they're literally Department of Biodiversity and Conservation. So they would issue taker's licenses where guys could go and sort of collect different things, and it was all under permits and stuff like that. But because the hobby's been around for a while now, we've got so many Southwest carpets in the hobby, we've got so many Stimson's pythons, there's really no shortage of them in the hobby. So they came out with the idea that they would ban taking of those particular species. So you're not allowed to take stimmies or carpets out of the wild anymore, Southwest specifically. And so they put that ban in place, and then they haven't issued any takers licenses in the last probably, I don't know if I would say probably 5 years, maybe more. I'm sure the guys who know a little bit more about the taking would be able to correct me on that, but there's only a select few in WA now. There's about 4 or 5 guys that I know of who can still take, and they're quite specific with what they go out to take now. So it's pretty hard to get animals out of the wild these days.
Okay. Well, at least you got some incredible gene pools to work with there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody's listening to this right now, drop what you're doing and go follow Asen on Instagram and check out his incredible animals over at AB_pythons, because it really is the animals that you have. The pictures are breathtaking. Do you just take pictures with your phone, or do you have a camera that you take pictures with?
So pretty much all of it's on my phone. I think there might be a couple that were taken with a proper camera. I think there's one pygmy python photo ages ago that I posted. It's like a close-up shot of the pygmy's head. I think I put that on Instagram. So that was taken with a proper camera, but pretty much they're all on my back lawn with my good old smartphone, and I just snap away and try and get the best picture. And I don't like editing or putting filters on it, because I like to try and get the true colors of the actual animal, because that's what's special about them, right? Like, you edit them, I don't see the point. So yeah,
it's cheating. Sometimes if something comes out too cool or too warm, I get changing, I understand changing the temperature and things like that, but man, the pictures of your animals, it comes through on its own. They are absolutely breathtaking. So what is it that got you into the hobby? What got you keeping? And actually, we'll get to that. I have another question. How do people view snakes in Australia compared to, because like I know how Americans are, and it seems like the vast majority of Americans like hate snakes, like it just based off of Facebook comments, right? Like you see somebody post a picture of a snake, and if it goes kind of viral and it's exposed to the broad population of Americans, there's a lot of hostility towards snakes. Is it similar in Australia, or is it kind of the same thing where the majority of people are terrified, or are there just pythons everywhere and people are just cool with them?
I mean, Perth. So first of all, Australia generally, I would say, people are terrified of snakes, and especially, obviously, we've got some pretty toxic ones over here. So, I think I can understand the, what would you say, concern or hesitancy being around them, but I think they're just poorly understood generally. And you hear all the wives' tales of, tiger snakes will chase you, or this will happen or that will happen. And you're like, it's just
here.
not.
It's water moccasins. It's water moccasins that chase you.
Yeah. So I feel like these kind of wives' tales, unfortunately, don't do the snakes any justice. But there's a surprising number of people with a little bit of education, a little bit of just showing them some, pythons that are non-venomous, and just be like, hey, look, this is a snake. Do you want to have a look at it and talk about it? And then, within an hour, they're like, oh, can I actually hold one? And then you're like, absolutely, go for it. You know what I mean? So it's nice being able to convert a few people, but generally speaking, I'd say, if, like you said, with America, if you were to kind of ask the entire population, I would say you get a resounding kind of fear to snakes.
So it's a human problem then. We're just dumb animals.
We are. And Perth specifically, it would be so good if there were pythons everywhere, but because of the metro area and the fact that because Perth's such a spread out city. I don't know, have you ever been to Perth at all?
No, I've never even been to Australia, but I did look at Perth on Google Maps, and I was kind of shocked how big of a city it is. Yeah,
well, it's I would assume it's quite different, because I haven't actually been to the States either, but it's just very spread compared to like built up. So we've unfortunately extinct a lot of the like southwest carpet pythons, which were sort of part of the coastal plain of Perth, are now extinct off the metro area, which is a real shame. So you can go sort of south of here, or east into the hills, or up north, and you can find them quite close to metro areas, but they're pretty much wiped out, which is disappointing, because then if people come across snakes in the city, they're almost certainly going to come across a venomous one, because we don't really have too many non-venomous ones that cruise around. So a lot of the ones are, tiger snakes and your dugites, and we get bardics and a few other bits and pieces floating around. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. It's so sad to hear that, when something gets, pushed to extinction and totally eliminated from an area. I mean, and it is I love watching the like the guys that go into homes in Australia and like pull carpet pythons out of attics and everything. I get a kick out of that. And they're usually like super laid back animals. They're usually, sometimes they're a little keyed up, but generally it's surprising how chill they are,
Absolutely. Like that's probably the thing that surprised me the most over the years, is when you find wild carpet pythons. And I'd say any of the ones that I've got outside right now would bite me in the face a lot quicker than the wild ones that I've caught. So they're it's personality dependent, right? I suppose, you'll get the odd one, like you said, that's fired up. But yeah, they're amazingly chilled out and just happy to kind of check you out. And they might give you a little warning nip, but it's nothing too major. So
yeah, I definitely want to get into your herping and everything. I know you have a lot of state forests surrounding Perth, right? There's just a lot of nature out there. But so anyway, getting back to my question that I kind of stomped out. What got you into snakes? How did you get turned on to them? Is it a family thing, or was it a childhood experience?
Yeah, so a little bit of a backstory for me. So I'm originally from New Zealand, so that's where I was born. So all my parents and grandparents and everyone, they're all Kiwis. So we moved over to Australia when I was about 9, and I think when I was in New Zealand, I used to go around and find little geckos and all sorts of bits and pieces that I could find. There's not a huge amount over there because we have no snakes. So
Yeah.
you're quite limited to the options. So when I came to Australia, it was like being in a candy store. I was like, oh my god, there's reptiles everywhere. There's lizards, there's geckos, there's all of it. It's just so cool. So as a kid, I just remember coming over to WA and straight away, I was finding bobtails, which are more commonly known as shinglebacks.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and
They're
blue
so cool.
tongues. Oh, they're the best. Like I'll tell you a little bit about some of the bobtails around here in a moment, but I'll continue going on with stuff. Otherwise, I'll get
Sure.
distracted. So yeah, and then I used to we moved over to a tiny little country town down south, which is in the Great Southern near a slightly bigger town called Albany. So the small town's called Jerramungup. You blink and you miss it. It's very, very small. I think the population of the entire shire was about 500 people, and the closest sort of decent town's a good sort of almost 2 hours away. So there's a lot of wheat and sheep farming, and there's a lot of native bush. And I used to just jump the bank fence from our house because we had bush out the back, and I used to just go out wandering in the school holidays, and I'd just be out finding snakes and lizards, and there'd be scorpions and spiders, and yeah, it was just, and kangaroos, emus, the whole lot. It's just birds everywhere. Awesome stuff. Like I just live for that sort of thing, being outdoors and exploring.
So you guys have emus over there?
We do. We've got lots of emus actually. So
Wow.
I would say kangaroos more so. There's just kangaroos everywhere. Like you can find kangaroos pretty easily around here. Emus a little bit harder to find, but there's a few spots where they're quite common. So yeah.
Do you have anything, like, what do you actually have to look out for when you're going out into the woods?
That's a good question. We don't really have anything. Like it always makes you laugh when people are like, oh, Australia, everything's so deadly. But on one hand, it is, absolutely. But then on the other hand, you can go out into the bush and feel really safe because most of the time there's not much else out there other than venomous snakes. And, there are a few, there'll be a few redbacks scattered around here and there, but they're not. I mean, I've got a heap around the house at the moment, actually, but, out in the bush, you're probably safer apart from the snakes. But yeah, we don't have any big sort of mammals that might attack you like mountain lions or anything like that. We've got dingoes here and there. And we do
Are they dangerous?
They can be, yeah, they can be. Probably,
Okay.
There have bbeen people attacked by dingoes and,
Wow.
some not very nice stories and things like that. So they can be, but it's pretty rare and it's quite hard to sort of see them. So you've probably got more risk from, I don't know, driving along the road and accidentally hitting a kangaroo or something like that and, losing control of the car. That's probably far more common than getting attacked by anything out in the bush.
Can kangaroos be aggressive?
They can. Yep. And there's some big ones too. Like I'm 6'2" and I've seen, some of the big males stand taller than me. They are just massive. Absolute
I can't
tanks.
even imagine what that's like, seeing a animal that tall.
They're just huge. They're amazing when they stand up like that. And when you see two of the big males fighting, we used to see them quite a lot down on, because they love the golf courses around Australia, because obviously there's grass for them to eat as much as they want. So often you'll see them on the golf courses. If you go around on dusk and dawn, they'll be sitting out eating the grass. And watching some of those big males fight is just so impressive. And, you're like, wow, that's a cool animal.
So the shinglebacks, can you keep those where you're at?
Yeah, you can. So I don't. I did have a Western blue tongue for a while, but they're quite a lot more upkeep, and with everything that I've got going on, I decided to move it on to a mate of mine who's down south, so he's got the time to put into it. But yeah, you can keep shinglebacks, and they're just awesome pets. They're even straight out of the wild. They open their mouth and poke their tongue out at you and hiss. And some of I have been bitten by a couple, and it does not tickle. I can drive sort of 10 minutes from my house. I find them across the road in the bush. We get them on our front driveway quite regularly in the summer. Well, more spring, and the males go out looking for females. But you can go 10 minutes down the road and there's some really nice lakes around there, and you find tiger snakes and dugites. And if you walk around there, you'll find, I went the other day and I found about 8 in an hour just cruising around. and they're so
Wow.
cool.
What can you collect those out of the wild, or is there regulations around that?
Yeah, so unfortunately not. So that would come under a taker's license. So
Oh, okay.
any of the fauna that you sort of find in the wild, I suppose, has to go
So
through a taker.
basically everything is protected then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing. What do they cost? Like if you were to go looking for a pet shingleback or blue tongue, like what's the average price over there?
Yeah, so depends on the locale. If you get something that's, I don't know if you've seen the Goldfields locale, but they're like cracking. They're like bright orange, like amazingly orange, vibrant orange banding with some like sort of darker kind of black to quite dark brown. They also have a
Yeah.
little bit of, sometimes they have a little bit of silver through them, but not as much. And then you've got, so those are worth sort of around the $800 to $1,000 mark.
Okay.
And then you've got like the Hills locale, and then a few others which are probably not as attractive, but they're still a nice looking shingleback, and they don't quite have the oranges and the nice silvers running through them. They're more of just a kind of plain brown. So you could pick one of those up for around $200.
Okay. Wow. That's wild.
Yeah.
They're pretty hard to find over here.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you
Yeah.
have?
Well, I mean the shinglebacks are hard to get over here. So yeah, it's so cool that you could just get those as a pet.
Oh, they are. Yeah, they're very popular because they're so great to have as pets. They're so chilled and they're really neat. They eat fruit and cruise around and eat cat biscuits, and they're neat animals. And
Yeah.
so, do you have? I would assume you probably have most of the eastern shinglebacks over in the States.
I don't even know. I've never looked into it. I think I looked into it once and I saw the price and I immediately just
Yeah,
gave
you're
up. Like there,
close that tab.
it's like, yeah, it's like looking at Boland's pythons.
Yeah,
It's but also I'm not really drawn to lizards. Like I appreciate them and I like I love it when they pop up in my feed, but the care is considerably higher. It makes it harder to take family vacations and
yeah,
things like that. Whereas, snakes, you can kind of, set them up and they're good for a few days if you, go and, get out of town with the family. But yeah, it's a bit more work. And then, so you have to make sure you have friends that can stop in and take care of them or
yeah.
yeah, it's a whole thing. So how many blackheads do you have?
I don't have a huge number at the moment. What do I have at the moment? I got 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I've got 9 at the moment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've got a few holdback younger ones from the last couple of seasons, and then I've got a couple of breeding pairs as well. So I was pretty stoked because I've got a really nice black and white female that I managed to produce randomly from a pair that I got. And yeah, it's looking potentially, and I don't want to be like, oh, it's exanthic because I haven't proven it out yet, but it's looking like it could potentially be that. So it's quite exciting because that'll be the first blackhead morph that's been captive bred in WA. So fingers crossed.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. So walk me through that. When was that one produced, and then like how are you able to tell kind of on the day that they hatch out, like which ones you're going to hold back and then which ones you're going to sell off?
Yeah, so I originally, when I saw the black and white one hatch, I was like, oh, it doesn't look that great. I'll probably move that one on and keep a couple of the others. And then as it kind of got a little bit, like it had its first shed, I was like, oh, that looks quite black and white. I was like, surely that's not going to be exanthic. So to give you a little bit of background, the pair that I got that produced it were 2 blackheads that I got off Matt Harris, the same guy that breeds a lot of nice stimmies. I've bought quite a few animals off him. He's got some crackers. And he had sort of got out of blackhead breeding and decided, he might hold back this last pair. And I'd sort of been bugging him for a couple of years and trying to convince my wife to let me get a pair because they were about $2,000 for the pair back then. So I managed to get hold of the pair and sort of grew them up from hatchies and had a crack at breeding them. And I wasn't sure because, the rumours are they're quite a lot more difficult to breed, and they are a little bit more technical than your other pythons, like your carpets and your stimmies and things. But you just got to give them plenty of heat. And so, yeah, basically kept them really hot during the summer, dropped them down, paired them after their shed. They went, thankfully. And so I ended up with, I think, 6 eggs. No, 5. That's right, it was 5. One ended up kinked, unfortunately, when it hatched, and then I ended up with 4. So one was kinked, and it was definitely wasn't black and white, so that had some oranges and some sort of yellow cream through it. And then I got 2 that had, one female actually had some quite nice ocelots on her, and she sort of had quite a neat pattern, more of a thinner banding with some ocelots, and then she had some nice creams and oranges through her as well. The male was quite similar, and then I got 2 black and white ones. I got one that was awesome, very, very reduced sort of banding, really clean pattern, but it was born with like some sort of congenital cardiomyopathy, so its heart was huge, and it was, you know, you could see it beating just straight out of the egg, and I just knew, I was like, oh no, like as far as the look of the animal, it was absolutely cracking. So unfortunately, that one I didn't have high hopes for. I sort of talked to my vet and I said, what do you think? And he said, look, you know, don't expect it to live too long. I ended up keeping it alive until it was 18 months old, so it did way better than what I thought it was going to. And then, yeah, she unfortunately died probably about 8 months ago or something, so that was a shame. But I still have one black and white one that I held back from that clutch, and I need to clean her up a bit, and I need to do a bit of work with the line to prove it out. But at this stage, it's looking like it's gone ahead in the right direction. But yeah, the decision to hold it back was based purely off the fact that I looked at it and I was like, well, this one's like A4 paper white and black, and the others have some cream and oranges and yellows through them. So I was like, I'm going to keep that one because I want to see what happens with it.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So how are you going to prove that out?
So at this stage, I'm doing a bit of a shortcut version. So I'm going to go with statistics. So, you know, obviously if you pair, the parents would be hets, so they're going to produce obviously 25% visuals, and then 66% pos het, and then another, what would it be, like 25%, you know, wild type thing. I'd have to actually think about the exact numbers, but I think it's around that. And then with the offspring, obviously the exantic, I'll pair her back with the father, and then I should get a 50-50 split. If I get a 50-50 split, then that means that it's more likely to be a recessive trait of some form. And then what I'll do after that is then at that point, fingers crossed I can get a few, and then I can start outcrossing across unrelated lines to then strengthen the line and prove it out that way.
Wow, that's awesome. So, do you have somebody that you're working with that you would do that with, or are you going to do that all in house? Or are you just going to breed them back to animals that you have?
The plan will be sort of long term. I think I'll probably get a few mates to take a couple and breed them because I won't have the room to outcross them all. But I think at this stage I'm keeping it in-house just to kind of see where it goes, because I don't want to hit a dead end and then I've, you know, scattered a whole bunch of animals around the place and it doesn't kind of sort of amount to much. But I think, yeah, we'll go in-house for the moment, but definitely looking like I've got a couple of good mates of mine who would definitely be keen to. I've already sort of mentioned it to them, and I said, if we get a couple of other non-related blackheads and, you know, we try and get a few black and white ones going, then we'll have to create a bit of a project. And I've got some nice yellow ones too, so we're going to do a bit of a mix between those and see if we can clean the backgrounds up and then inject some yellow in. And yeah, so there's a few kind of exciting plans for the future, but we'll see how we go.
That's really cool. Yeah, and blackheads get pretty big too, so keeping a ton of adults is, that's quite the undertaking.
Yep, absolutely.
Are they pretty active? They
are, yeah. So they're very, especially during obviously the hotter months and things like that, they just cruise around quite quite regularly. I think, with the stimmies and the carpets, a lot of the time I see them just sort of hanging out in the hides, and they come out here and there at night and things. But the blackheads seem to be pretty active day and night. So yeah, a lot more active than some of our other species. Womas are quite similar too.
How many womas do you have?
I've only got the one at the moment. I had a few. I had about 6, and I bred them. But then what happened was I've got a good mate of mine who actually decided that he would go ahead and breed all black womas. And super exciting for the hobby, but pretty much dumped the market over here. So anyone that breeds anything other than full black womas kind of got the boot. But yeah, so I decided that I'd move them on, and I had some really nice, really clean Derby locale animals. So they were really like high sort of contrast banding and stuff like that. I've got a few photos on Insta of those, but I really like the line that I had. But I think I sort of I was just being a little bit facetious there, but he's a great guy. He produces some cracking animals, and I probably lost a bit of interest in the womas as well. And then cost of living's hit the WA kind of community pretty hard, and then I think as a result of the change in the cost of living, a lot of people have stopped buying snakes, and that's across the board. And womas are one of those snakes where I think there's not a lot of people looking for a woma as their first snake, and so it's quite hard to sort of find homes for them all. So I didn't want to end up with a whole bunch of hatchies on my hands when that was happening, so I had to bite the bullet. But I know where they've gone. I've sold all the adults that I had as the kind of breeding project to one lady, so she's still got them, which is good.
Okay, and so so with the way it works there, you could export animals out of Western Australia, but you can't bring them back in. Exactly. Okay, so and she's in WA.
Yeah, she's in Perth. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
So that was one of those things where I was like, I'll sell them, but I don't want them going too far in case I get 5 years down the track and change my mind. But yeah, at this stage, we're not heading down the woma pathway. So I've just got my original male, who he's nothing special, but he's sentimental to me. He's my first woma that I bought, and he's a cool dude. His name's Pumbaa, so he's neat.
Is everybody in all snake keepers that are in Perth, do you all know each other?
I would say mostly, yeah. It's a pretty small community. So that's wild. If we don't know each other, because I wouldn't say I know everyone, personally or anything like that, but I would say
of each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most people.
Wow.
Yeah. It's pretty rare that I come across someone I'm like, oh, I've never heard that name before. So there's there are a lot of kind of sort of pet keepers who they might only have 1 or 2 snakes, where I wouldn't have, you obviously won't really know them, but all of the breeders and stuff like that, we all know each other. So yeah.
So how does what's the process like for selling snakes to each other?
Yeah, so you can go. Do you mean like breeder wise, or do you mean just generally to the?
Either way, yeah. Like if you were selling one to a breeder or to a private individual, what is that process like when you're producing animals?
Yeah, so we have a few Facebook pages, and we also have a computer website. What do you call it? Like sort of platform called Gumtree, and you can post an ad up, and then they'll be like, I think it's kind of like would Craigslist be the right thing to compare it to, maybe? Is that kind of like a general, you can post anything to kind of sell on? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like our Craigslist. It's called Gumtree, and so you can put them up and people can find you there. I think the problem with Gumtree, though, is you get so many weirdos, so I tend not to post too much on there. I just go with the Facebook groups, and then people reach out and go, oh, hey, I've seen your pages, or I've heard you might have stimmies, and and I've got a number of other sort of main breeders who we all kind of recommend each other because we all have nice animals, so we're happy to steer people in each other's direction. So we've got a good community in that regard. I think there's not really, or not that I've experienced, there's not too much competition, to be honest, amongst us. We're all just in it for the enjoyment of the animals and to see people get nice stuff. And so, yeah, I think it's quite good. And people can reach out providing they've got a license, and there's a couple of ways you can do it. So they can buy the animal from us and then it goes through a dealer. So dealers are basically licensed to take the animal and then hand it to the next person. They do a transfer from license to license, and then that gets sent through to the to DBCA, who's our wildlife kind of organisation, and they keep track of all of it. It's all through the online portal. So we can do it that way, or we go through the DBCA directly. And so you sort of apply for a, like, what would you say, transfer, and then they'll sort it. But you've got to, I think it's like, you need to allow like 5 to 7 days or something for them to get back to you. So you've got to pick a time and date ahead and all that sort of thing. So it's a bit trickier that way. It is cheaper, but it's a bit of a pain. So most people just go through dealers because you can do it on the day.
It's like selling a gun here in America.
Yeah. It is. Like, honestly, it's very, very tightly regulated because, you know, over here, I think everyone's so focused from the wildlife perspective of just maintaining the biodiversity. But I think, you know, my own personal thoughts on how it's done, probably for another podcast. But yeah, there's some things that they do that are great and other things that probably aren't managed as well as they could be. But I think overall it does stop people just getting animals, you know, and not looking after them properly and things like that. Well, I wouldn't say it stops it, but it means you've got to be a lot more keen to own the snake than just picking it up randomly on a whim and just being like, oh, I'll just, you know, get a pet snake and chuck it in my garage and do whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that could be a good thing. I mean, it sounds like what you have to deal with is a little bit excessive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, but then at the same time, like we've got Burmese pythons where I'm at here in Florida. And maybe if we had a system like that wouldn't have happened, you know, but at the same time, does it have to be that excessive with like the you know, having a dealer that you have to transfer through? And I mean, that's a lot of hoops to jump through.
It is. It really is.
And so that's the same process. Like if you and a buddy wanted to swap females or males or something for a breeding project.
Yeah. So I suppose that's one of those things where it's probably you know, you might get caught on a technicality where, because it goes off numbers of species as opposed to individual animals. So if you've got 10 Stimsons and you have a mate who's got 10 and you swap one, technically you've got the same, so then the transfer's probably not worth doing. Providing it's more that if they come out and raid you, and then, you know, because they do inspections, and they can come out at any time and come in and just go through everything. And if you've got any animals that aren't licensed, or you know, say you've got 10 and they only find 8, then they're like, well, where's the other 2? And so, you know, there's a whole bunch of that sort of thing that happens here as well. So you've just got to keep on top of your returns. They call them returns. You've got to do them every time you purchase an animal and log it on the online system so that it's all recorded.
What about if an animal dies?
Oh, they've got like an option that you can select that says deceased, and then you have to put the date in and that sort of thing as well. So it's... And
this is all done through an app or a website?
It's all done through their department website, yeah. So you've all got your own portal with your email and everything that's licensed to you, and you or registered to you, I should say, and you pop it in. It's got all your license details, all your animal returns. So it's got however many animals you've got and all of that sort of thing. So
now, do you guys do any kind of actual testing for disease, like swabbing and sending out to somewhere, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, no. So we do. It depends on who you ask. So I've done a fair bit of testing on my animals over the years, because, you know, you might get one with a respiratory illness and you go, oh, is that something that, you know, and as my collection's growing and I've gotten more animals from different places, and, you know, I try to be as careful as I can and, pick and choose. But, I've ended up with mites before, and that's a nightmare, and you end up with the odd thing here and there. But thankfully in WA, because one of the good things about the biodiversity kind of regulations being so strict is that we haven't had like an outbreak of sunshine virus or nidovirus or any of the main sort of viruses that wipe out populations. So that's helpful. It has been detected in WA, but typically not in people's licensed captive collections. It's usually found in confiscated collections where people have exotics and all sorts of stuff that they're not licensed to have. So on that hand, we're quite lucky. But then we still have common things like, we have your mycoplasma strains that I'm not sure if you guys have that. I assume it probably would be over there potentially as well. But that's been swabbed in wild pythons here, and it's been swabbed in the ones at the zoo, and it's been swabbed in, I've got a couple in my collection as well of mycoplasma. And that's a nasty one. I think, thankfully, if you keep your animals in with good husbandry and stuff like that, you don't run into issues. But I've had one male that's been stressed because he was wild caught. Someone had gone and poached him from the wild, I assume, and then was put up by, because what happens if someone goes and poaches an animal, or they find poached animals, or there's an animal that has turned up in the city randomly under a car or something, it gets collected and taken to the DBCA, the wildlife people, and then they put it up on like an auction platform, and all of the dealers can basically bid on the animal, and then they can buy it, and then they can sell it to the hobby. So it's their way of kind of legalizing the animal then. And so I picked up a really nice male carpet, and he hadn't been in captivity long because he was still you could just tell that he's a wild caught animal, and he ended up stressing out a bit and had a few respiratory symptoms. And I sort of thought, I'll take it down to a vet, because I've only had, I think, kind of 2 RIs over the years in all my animals, thankfully. So I've been quite lucky. And I took him in, and we swabbed him for mycoplasma because it's sort of a new thing that we've been starting to do here in WA, and came back positive. So treated him with a different course of antibiotics, and that got it under control, and I haven't had any issues since. But I think, if you're not keeping your animals well, and that's poor husbandry, or, enclosures aren't clean, heat's wrong, humidity's poor, or too much, and, all of these sorts of factors start to add up, and then the animals start to show symptoms. So, yeah, have you heard of them? Do you guys have mycoplasma over there, or?
I don't know. I've had an RI before. And it was with my ball python, and I had tried a different technique so she went through a really bad shed, and it was like she exploded her shed skin all over her cage, and it was stuck on her back, and it was just a nightmare. And it was the first time she had a bad shed. And so the next time that she was going into shed, I went a little too heavy on the humidity, and all of a sudden she, I had taken her out. I think she had left a urate or a stool in her hide. So I took her out, and as soon as I took her out, she opened her mouth, and started breathing, and I was like, oh no, and It was right when there was a hurricane coming in.
Oh man.
And but I don't know how it is there, but are you doing the swabs, or do you have a solid vet that's doing cultures and finding out what your animal is actually infected with?
Yeah, pretty much. So we've got, so our vet over here is awesome. I've been using him for quite a number of years now. And he knows my animals well and all that sort of thing. So he cultures stuff. So it's expensive. Depends on if we're thinking that it's mycoplasma now that it's known to be in the collection and things like that. And I've done a bunch of reading of a whole bunch of different papers that have come out about it in pythons. And the good thing is at this stage, it seems to be that it's naturally occurring in, asymptomatic populations quite commonly. So when he sort of, because it's, rather than culturing for it, it has to be PCR tested because you look for the antigen. So PCR's for that. But if there's anything that doesn't, that's not treated with a broad spectrum and then not treated with any sort of specifics for mycoplasma and stuff like that, then we look at cultures then at that point to grow it. So we are lucky to have that service. Is that something that you guys do as well, or?
No, I'm not fortunate enough to have a vet that's that, thorough. They kind of just gave me antibiotics and said, here, give your snake this. So yep. That's a bacterial infection though?
The mycoplasma. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, and once it's in your collection, is it just in your collection or do you eradicate it with the antibiotics?
So it's a great question. We still don't know. So wow. There doesn't seem to be any kind of scientific literature that clearly says you can eradicate it. A lot of them say it's possible, but it seems to be difficult to. And it is a bacteria species or genus that's been known to be quite stubborn and because humans can get it and birds can get it and all sorts, but they're different specific species of mycoplasma. Sure. But it is notoriously stubborn to treat. So I think it's just the nature of it because it's such a pain of a bacteria to try and treat because it's almost like a hybrid virus bacteria. And it's so small and it lacks a cell membrane and things like that. So it's very different to your standard bacteria that would cause a lot of the common RIs, and a lot of those common RIs are treated really nicely with just your broad spectrum, like TMS antibiotics, or I think what were the other ones, like some type of cephalosporin. So
you're doing an injection or is it oral?
Yeah. So for the standard RI that's not mycoplasma, it'll be an injection, so subcut injection, and then for your mycoplasma, it's oral antibiotics, and it's absolutely it's a nightmare. It's the worst thing you've got to do.
So that's what I had to do with my ball python.
You had to do oral as well. Yeah, right.
For 2 weeks, so it was 14 doses.
Same.
And it was a large injection. Now, keep in mind, this was just like a standard, like human. I think it was actually it was like from a compounding pharmacy. Like it was just a powder that they mixed up in the bottle, and it was like cherry flavored. And I like, no joke, it was a nightmare. So she was covered in like this sticky goo that because I'm trying to shoot this down her throat, and then it's coming out the sides of her mouth, and and like whatever trust she had in me, she lost over those 2 weeks.
Oh, it's such a nightmare. I feel ya, because I just did that with this male. That's why he's in the front room, actually, just here in the rack, because he's I'm just trying to baby him a little bit. He's doing well now, and he's smashing food again and all that sort of thing. But I'm just keeping a closer eye on him. But yeah, he doesn't like me either, so makes two of us.
So yeah, what about serpentovirus or Nido? Is that's not in private collections, but you said it shows up in like in animals that are confiscated?
Yeah, so I think because a lot of the confiscated ones are obviously people who don't have anything on license, so they go and they get pythons from exotic species from around the world that are sort of smuggled in, or they'll find stuff over east and bring it in, and that's where they're finding the nidovirus and those sorts of things coming in. But fingers crossed at this stage. At this stage, we haven't had any outbreaks in WA through the hobby, so that's great, because some of the stuff that's happening over in the eastern states in the last 12 months has been devastating. Like I've seen multiple guys just having to euthanize their entire collections. It's just gutting. Oh no. Yeah.
I talked to Dr. Julander about serpentovirus, and actually, it's come up a couple times on the podcast, and it seems like they're working on an antiviral for it, which hopefully that'll be a solution to the problem, and also taking the animal to their temperature maximum and keeping them at that. So putting them like in an incubator and bringing them up to like 95 degrees and basically keeping them there for a long period of time to kill the virus,
Yeah.
kind of creating a fever for the snake
Yeah, I was
almost.
going to say it's like an induced fever.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just getting them hot enough, and I did change my husbandry with my ball python. I made sure that like I don't mist in her hide anymore. I kind of mist around the enclosure to bring up the humidity, and I increased her temperature too. I went to a higher wattage bulb. And it seems like it's fixed that problem. It's funny how you can make like one stupid mistake and then it shows you the other mistake you were making, right? Like my hot spot for her wasn't quite hot enough. And then also just kind of, putting that extra humidity in the hide, which is a dark, area where things can grow. And then also she defecated in there, so it was almost like the perfect storm that kind of showed me all my weaknesses,
Yeah. And it often is that though, right? Like when you look at guys who are getting, recurrent, whether it be skin infections or respiratory infections or anything like that, typically it's almost like that tip of the scales, right? There's all these factors that once they align, it just goes boom, and then you get the cascade of stuff after that. So yeah, and that's, it's pretty much the same thing with mycoplasma, even though it's not, because it's almost, I'm hesitant to use the word commensal because it's not really a true commensal. Well, we don't know yet, but it seems that way in the literature. So I think it is, pathological when the animal's stressed. So once those factors have tipped and and you've got the cascade, then it kind of rears its head. But you can keep it at bay. And I've had, I've tested quite a number of asymptomatic animals in my collection that are doing perfectly, and they've tested positive. So to me, I'm like, well, now I know it's in my collection. I've just got to keep looking after everything as best that I can, and it's been fine. Everything's doing well, so that's good.
Yeah, snake pathogens are weird, right? Like there's not a ton of research being done, and thank God for the people that are doing the research. But it's I forgot who said it. Somebody said like, "Oh, a virus that kills snakes, perfect. We need more of that." Like that's what the general population thinks.
Cool.
So it's hard to get the funding for the research and then treatments on top of it and trying to get an understanding of it. But man, it's so annoying, and it scares me. It really does, hearing about all these things that. Now hearing about this, bacterial infection that can just stay in the collection, and but so you have other animals that have it, but they're asymptomatic.
Yes, I do. So after this guy, and it's hard to know whether they already had it or whether they've got it through this guy, because they're different species. So it was a blackhead, it was another carpet python, and a Stimson's python. The blackhead and the Stimson's python were both wild caught and had been, they've been in the actual hobby for sort of, got to be 15 years now. So they've been wild caught, and then they've been in the hobby in other guys' collections, and then I've acquired them. And the whole time they've been healthy with no issues, and they still are. And I just sort of selected at random in my reptile room. I just went, I'll test these 3 from different areas to see what shows up. And then they all tested positive. And I was like, oh, well, that kind of ruins my plan of swapping things around then. So I think... And so then I thought, all right, well, what's the go with this mycoplasma thing then? I need to go and do some reading. So I jumped on and I've, looked for as many articles as I could find. And, there was one study that was done through Murdoch Uni here in Perth. So it's one of the universities. And they went through and they collected a whole bunch of wild snakes. And that was, I should say pythons, because I don't recall them testing any elapids, but it was all pythons, so Stimsons and southwest carpets. I can't remember if they tested blackheads and womas or pygmies. And then they tested all the animals at Perth Zoo, and they tested all of the confiscated animals that came through DBCA. So there was quite a good pool of animals in all 3 of the groups, and they swabbed all of them so PCR tested for mycoplasma, nidovirus, and was it sunshine virus as well? I think.
What is the sunshine virus? It sounds so happy and fantastic.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's the opposite. So it was, I feel I probably should know more about it than what I do, but I don't, because we're in WA and it seems to be over in the eastern states. But I believe it originated on the Sunshine Coast over in Queensland. So that's where it got the name Sunshine virus. And it's been a massive problem over east. So it's a really, really nasty virus that obviously, turns the snakes, well, as a lot of those viruses do it gives them all sorts of different problems. But the typical part is the consistent decline, neurological issues and recurrent respiratory infections and a few other bits and pieces, and then they kind of die. And it's super contagious as viruses are, and just wipes out populations. And then you've got a whole bunch of asymptomatic carriers, and I think it can also actually spread vertical transmission, so through eggs and stuff as well.
What?
It's nasty.
Wow,
really nasty.
That's bananas. I see. So I was under the impression that when eggs are laid, that the inside is sterile, right? That there's that there's nothing in there. So you'd think that then if you incubate, the temperature and being isolated for that duration of time would kind of kill anything off. So the virus actually is in the egg.
I think now the scientists will probably hate me for this because I could be saying something completely wrong, but my understanding I'll do it anyway. Why not? I've got to look like the idiot. You've got to be the expert here. I've got to be the idiot.
No, there's no chance, man.
So I think what happens is when they are, when the virus infects the snake, I believe, as some of the viruses do, sort of embed their DNA into the animal's DNA, and then when the animal then obviously replicates its DNA and things like that, it produces more of the viral DNA. So then when your body kind of goes to produce different proteins from DNA, then you end up producing more viral particles. So when it passes the DNA onto the eggs and then they hatch, they carry the bad DNA as well, essentially, from the virus.
Wow.
And I'm not 100% sure if that's the mode of transmission for sunshine virus or nidovirus, but I know that does happen in some of the viruses. And they do say, I read a couple of papers on sunshine virus, that it does spread vertically. I think it's sunshine virus. I could be saying the wrong thing again, but anyway. And so, with vertical transmission, that's kind of the mechanism of how it works. So that's what I think, but I'll do some more reading anyway. But yeah.
Yeah. So you did that random testing and they all tested positive for that bacteria. So you're just, it's kind of just, it is what it is. You'll just treat it if it comes up and
pretty much. And I sort of found, when I felt reassured after doing the reading, because when I saw in that article that it was, there was a bunch of the wild caught population that tested positive to it, and they were all asymptomatic as well. There was a bunch in the confiscated, and then all of the Perth Zoo animals who are all well, as they're all animals at the zoo that are on display and things like that. They all tested positive as well. So, and I've heard of a few guys since mine tested positive throughout the hobby. A few other breeders have been like, oh yeah, I've had animals test positive for that. So I think it's a lot more common than what we sort of originally probably thought. And I know that there's a bunch of people that wouldn't even be testing their animals, and they probably don't even know what mycoplasma is. And so they, potentially, whether they've had RI or not, it's probably going, undetected at the moment. But yeah, so it doesn't seem to...
Just being treated as an RI, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And wow. I wonder, because, there's been a few RIs where people are like, oh, I lost this animal, we gave it antibiotics and it still passed away. And then I wonder if that might have been a mycoplasma infection, because it doesn't, you can't just use your TMS or your cephalosporin because they won't cover the mycoplasma. You've got to use a different, like a fluoroquinolone for mycoplasma. So it's a different antibiotic, and you wonder if these kind of antibiotic resistant sort of respiratory infections are actually a mycoplasma that hasn't been swabbed for.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it's kind of funny. I remember, I think it's like 10% of the human population has strep just in them, and they're hanging asymptomatic. Out. Yeah, yep. And when I I was going out with this girl, and I think I found one of those people because I had strep I'd get strep, they'd treat it with antibiotics, it'd go away, and then I get it again. And it was just this constant thing to the point where I needed my tonsils taken out.
Yeah, right.
And, it's like, and I remember researching that and seeing that, like, yeah, some people just like have it and they're just walking around with it, and just, giving it to people.
It's a very, very similar.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. Man. Yeah. I get anxiety. That's like the thing. That's the biggest thing that gives me anxiety is the pathogens in snakes. And like, I want to get my collection tested, but if I were to do every animal, it'd probably cost me like $2,500.
Yeah.
So I think it's around, I think it's like $100 per animal to have them checked for serpentovirus. And I don't even know if that's if that's just the one virus or if that would be for the whole, or if that would be like a panel that they would test other things. I'll have to, I need to look into it. I've been talking about it for a while now, and I'm maybe like what you did, go through and just check a couple animals, check like 5 or 6, Yeah.
Cause that was kind of my aim. I was like, if I'm to get a true picture of whether it's kind of throughout my reptile room, I really need to just select a few random ones. And I'm the same. Like if it's 200 to swab for mycoplasma. And then it's, I think, I believe it's about 250, 300 to swab for the viruses over here. So I was sort of like, well, and I've tested animals in the past over the years for viruses. Just they've had a respiratory infection or they've been a bit off, and so I've been like, I'll just test them and see. And it's thankfully always come back negative, and they're all fine now anyway. But I sort of think if I was to test every single animal for mycoplasma, it's going to cost me thousands. So I thought I'll just stick with a couple of randoms and see what turns
And you found out
up.
what you needed to know anyway.
What can you do? So, and then I sort of went, because I'm like you, I'm very particular with my collection. I always want what's best for the animals, and I want to keep them well, and I want to make sure they're healthy and they're thriving, and that when I'm breeding them, everyone's getting good quality healthy animals. So when I saw the mycoplasma, my heart sank, and I was like, oh man. So I just went into this full just reading mode of looking into as much research as I could find, which wasn't a huge amount, and just having conversations with my vet and looking into different papers on other animals to see if there was any similarities and stuff. And it sort of got to the point where I thought, well, at this stage, it seems as though it can be relatively, what would you say, harmless in a sense, benign. I suppose.
Yeah.
Benign. Yeah, that's a good word. So it can be quite benign unless something's not right, at which point, I'll look at mitigating those risks.
That's kind of funny that you brought in this, this stray carpet python, and it kind of, that's kind of what got you going down this whole path, right?
It did.
Yeah.
And I had actually, the worst part about it was, so I decided to do a breeding loan with a mate, and I was like, got this male that I've just picked up, and he was all good, and I sent him up there, and he was up there for the winter, so obviously with a female, and they bred and all that sort of thing. But I think he got a little bit stressed being in captivity for not very long, and then he's been paired and he's in a new environment all of a sudden, and those sorts of things. And obviously, for our carpets, we tend to drop the temps quite a lot to breed them and those sorts of things. And I got him back, and he was sounding a little bit, gurgly and a little bit kind of bubbly, and I thought, oh, that doesn't sound great. So that was when I put him in the quarantine rack in the front hallway and did all those sorts of things and treated him, and I thought, oh, perfect, the problem's gone. I've treated him with the antibiotics and all these sorts of things, and then reintroduced him and that sort of stuff to the other snakes, and then later found out that you can't eradicate it, and I went, oh, well, that was a bit of a mistake. So, but like I said, it was actually the other snakes that were inside, because I keep my carpets out in an aviary. So yeah, it was the snakes inside that tested positive. So I don't know.
Oh, cool. I was going to ask you about keeping outdoors, and if you do it, can you walk me through that? How you keep them outside?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not too much of a crazy setup that I've got. I just got a bird aviary, and I sort of was looking for what might be a suitable area of the house because it gets pretty hot here in the summer. So I sort of thought, well, they're quite cold tolerant, not so much really, really heat tolerant when it gets on those hot days. So I didn't want them cooking. So what I did was like, how can I keep them outside where they get enough sun, but then they also don't bake in summer? So I got a good old esky or a cooler, and I buried it. Also, I sort of made a false floor up one end of the aviary, partitioned it and riveted a partition in, and then I put playground bark around it and put a bit of polythene pipe through into the esky and then silicone sealed around it. And it just works awesome because now the snakes can be out there. And I also built an extension on the top out towards the outside that juts out, and I've got fake turf on there, and they come out and bask in the sun, and they naturally thermoregulate. And then I earthed it in with a waterproof electrical box and earthed it into the main power of the house, so I can give artificial heat during the winter if there's not enough sun or something like that. And
dude, that's genius using a cooler. It's insulated.
What? I must say, I'm quite proud of it because even on a 45 degrees Celsius day here in summer, I've gone out and checked it, and the hottest temperature.
I gotta.
Yeah, we'll bring it up.
Let me do the calculator. All right. Holy shit, dude. 45 degrees Celsius is 113 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
That is bananas.
We don't get a lot of 45 degree days here in Perth, but we get the odd one. And you know, it's unbearable. It's horrible. So I needed to make sure that they would survive, you know, if those days hit, because we might get, you know, we'd be lucky to get one or two of those a year. But
what's the humidity like on a day like that?
Oh, usually not too bad. I think, you know, you'd be sitting at about probably 60%, maybe something like that.
That is so hot and humid. That is humid for that temperature. That is insane. Wow.
We tend to get thunderstorms like following those hot days. So you get like a really hot, humid day, and then the thunderstorm comes through and kind of drops the temp. But yeah, so we it's not uncommon to get, you know, sort of 36 degrees Celsius days through to kind of 40, 41, and for it to sit between those temps.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to check it. All right, so 36 is about 97 degrees to 41 is 106. Wow, you guys get hot there.
It gets pretty warm. Like the last couple of weeks have been pretty much between 36 and 41 for like 2 weeks. So it's not been a super fun time. But that's why.
So when it's that hot, what's the temperature inside your cooler hide box?
33 degrees. Maximum temp. I went out a couple of years ago on a 45 degree day because we haven't had a 45 degree day for a couple of years now, so all that I'm aware of. But I went out on a 45 degree day, 33 degrees.
Okay, so that's 91. So that's considerably cooler.
Yep. And then probably the coldest temperature that I've checked, which was I think the first year that I made the aviary, so that's going back kind of 5 years ago now, we had a -1 degree night, which is pretty cold for Perth. So we don't get snow or anything like that. It doesn't snow here. So I think it snowed. Has it snowed here? In one of the suburbs once that I've ever heard of. It probably has another time, but and when I say snow, it was more like sleet. It was glorified hail, pretty much. So, so -1 degree night. The coldest it gets in the esky is 13 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
So I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit.
Let me check that. What 13 is? 13 is 55. So it's pretty chilly. But the pythons are kind of made for that, right?
Oh, they're so, like, the Southwest carpets are awesome. They're so tolerant to the cold. The biggest issue for them is the heat.
Wow. Yeah, dude, that heat is next level. And the humidity too. 60% humidity with 113 degrees, that would be stifling. I mean, that's rough.
Yeah, it's horrendous. It's worse up north. Like up north through the Pilbara and the Kimberley are just, like it's just insane.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, I can't even fathom that. Like I can't fathom working outside in that, like trying to do manual labor and
Oh yeah,
yard work and stuff.
no,
You die.
I just don't. You do. People do.
That
So
is so
I tend to
scary.
just, and then the aircon stops working. That's the worst part because you turn the aircon on to cool the house down, and then the aircon doesn't even work when it gets that
Oh
hot. Like
no.
once it gets above like 39 degrees, I reckon like universally all the aircons just decide to pack up the shop. They probably go off to the pub to have a cold beer, but and then you're left sitting in the house. So
Wow. Man. Yeah, that's wild. You guys are tough living out there in Perth.
oh, I'm not. I'm not built for the sun, mate. Look at me. I got red. Well, I don't even have hair anymore, but I got red hair and freckles. I'm built for the Arctic climate.
Yeah. You should be
I'm
in the
just
UK.
yeah. Oh, 100%. I'm just here for the reptiles, mate. That's all.
Oh man. Yeah, man. That is rough. So you're not going out and herping in weather like that, right?
Not during the day. Nah, nothing. You won't find anything during the day in that. It's just way too hot. But if you go out, like those nights are the best. If you can get those really hot days, and then you can get like a humid, thunderstormy type night, you cannot get better than that. It is just awesome. You go up, and you go out looking for carpets and stuff, and you'll find all sorts at night. You'll find all sorts of cool like geckos and frogs and different species of snakes, elapids and then you'll get your python species and stuff like that. So yeah, that's when things really turn on.
Is it like, are you guaranteed to find a python if you go out on a night like that?
No, unfortunately. I wish, because I would have found a lot more, but I suppose
Yeah.
it depends where you go. Like I tried to tick off 3 locales in 3 nights not too long ago. I think you probably would have seen the photos that I posted, but I tried to find a locale just south of Perth, and I managed to find one just south of Perth, one just north, and then I went out into the hills to try find one the third night to tick off 3 locales, but I didn't pull through. So, but yeah. So you'll get the odd night, but I found a nice big dugite, which is like a so they're a species of brown snake, so they're called the western spotted brown snake, and they're in the Pseudonasia group. So they're quite toxic, but in comparison to some of the other species, not so toxic. But I would not want to get bitten by one. So I found a nice big healthy one of those, and a few little Burton's legless lizards and things like that. So there's always cool things to find. You'll find something if you go out.
Yeah. So when you found that brown snake, did you are you hooking it, or are you just observing it from a distance?
A little bit of both. That one I didn't manage to grab because it took off. It was about 9:30 at night, so it was dark, and it tried to sit still, and I pulled up slowly and I hopped out. And as I got out, they're pretty switched on. They know what's going on, and they're quick too. So I got out and I walked around the car, and as I got into the headlights of the car, it sort of saw me and it just darted off into the bush. And I just had bare feet, so I wasn't going to go trudging in after it.
Dude, you're insane. You're insane. You got out of the car to go mess with a brown snake with bare feet.
Oh, well, it was probably dumb. Don't tell my wife I did that. She'll be a bit annoyed at me. But yeah,
I'm gonna clip this and send it to her.
Yeah. She'll be lucky you're not going out again. But yeah, I try to have my boots on. I'm not like, though. There's a lot of guys that will just go out flat out barefoot. I got a mate that we go out looking, and we found a dugite the other day, and he picked it up in bare feet. I tend to be.
Why? You guys have shoes, right?
Totally, and that's the thing. I will 9 times out of 10 wear my boots, but I was driving the road for a little while. My feet were sore, and I was like, I'll just take my boots off. I might not find anything at this stage. And then, of course, Murphy's Law, we got up the road a bit, and there was a dugite, so I was like, I'm just going to jump out anyway, because may as well. But it took off before I could grab it. But we do get, and those and tiger snakes are even more toxic, the western tiger snakes. We get a few of those, like very commonly. So dugites and tiger snakes are the 2 by far most common elapids that we get around the metro region. And then we get these little snakes that are, I'm probably going to say the scientific name wrong. I think it's Echiopsis curta, but I could be wrong. But they're bardics. And they're about probably a foot long. and they're cracking sort of like, some of them are like beautiful bright orange all the way through to like olivey greeny, some are silvery, and they're kind of like quite a broad range of these sort of colours, but they're a really neat little elapid. And it wasn't until one almost tagged me the other day where I was like, I can't recall how venomous these are. So I was like, I'll just Google it real quick, and then I realised that they use death adder venom as a what do you call it, like an antidote for them. So I was like, oh, they're probably pretty toxic then. So I'll be a little bit more careful when I pick those up, because they're so little, they just whip around. And I had it on a stick, and I was showing my daughter, and as it whipped, I pulled my hand
you
away.
had your daughter with you?
Yeah, it was even worse. I know, my wife would be so much more angry, but thankfully I learnt. And yeah, I won't be mucking around with those as casually anymore. But yeah, they are cool little elapids, very cool little elapids. And you'd look at them and you'd be like, oh, that looks like a harmless little snake, but apparently they pack a punch.
Oh man. Yeah, all right. So what's your game plan if you get bit?
So I carry pressure bandages with me anytime I go out. So whether I'm going looking for pythons, or if I'm just walking in the bush, even if I'm going to, if I'm going four-wheel driving and I want to go out to the beach or something, I'll take pressure bandages with me, because, I think two things here, just because of the toxicity of the snakes, and also, half the time you might be out of cell phone reception, you'd be out in the middle of the bush, it's pretty hard to get help. So yeah, I just make sure they've got the right first aid with me, which are the pressure bandages, and then, you just have to cross your fingers for the rest that you can kind of get the Royal Flying Doctor or someone out to you before anything goes too south.
All right, and is there infrastructure in place for that sort of situation if you were to get tagged by a tiger snake?
Yeah, so all the hospitals around Perth, like the emergency departments, have the polyvalent, and then they have, I don't know if they have any kind of specifics. I think they just carry the polyvalent that covers most of the elapids in the area. So thankfully, if you do get tagged, because I know there's been quite a few people get bitten by tiger snakes and dugites, and there was one guy that got bitten by western brown, and I know a couple of people that have been bitten by bardics and stuff like that, and the ones who got bitten by the Pseudonasia and your tiger snakes and stuff, they've managed to successfully get antidote at the or antivenin at the hospitals, thankfully. So and yeah, I've got two mates that got bitten by bardics. One
really who
it was a dry bite because he was taking off the road when a truck was coming along, and it went out as like the headlamp went off, and he just grabbed it because he didn't want it to get run over, and it bit him on the finger, and he didn't really think too much of it. Didn't get sick or anything, so it must have been a dry bite, because the other guy reckons he was not really, because it's a very potent neurotoxin, as I now know.
God.
And so he was really, really crook. So he reckons he was couldn't move his arms or legs, couldn't hold his head up, vomiting in the shower.
No.
Yeah, and he didn't even go to hospital. And I was like, why wouldn't you go to hospital? Because
so he just toughed it out.
He just sat in the shower
and puked his brains out and couldn't move, and he survived.
Yeah, he survived.
Oh my God! With zero treatment at all.
Zero treatment.
You Australians are out of your damn minds.
It would probably not the treatment pathway I would choose, but I can't speak for everyone. So yeah, no,
you'd be too afraid to tell your wife. You just
I'd be like,
Oh man, that is so terrifying.
But it's rare though. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't happen that often, thankfully.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's fair. There's been a couple of people around Perth. I think only two that I know of in the last sort of 7 or 8 years that have been killed by venomous snakes. I believe both tiger snakes. One was a lady walking her dog along the beach, and she felt what she thought was a stick on her ankle, and unfortunately I think she collapsed a couple of hours later at home, and then they took her in and realised that she'd been bit by a tiger snake at the beach and didn't realise.
Wow.
And it just shows,
sad.
Yeah, it's horrible. And, I think really with the correct first aid with the pressure bandages, they are just so effective. You can't afford not to carry one with you.
What is a pressure bandage? Is that like a tourniquet?
So it's so they're actually different to the tourniquet. So they've got I should have brought one with me in the front room. They're out there, but they're basically like an elastic bandage, and they've got rectangles, like a printed rectangle on them that runs like one here, one next to it, all the way like down the bandage. So
Uh-huh.
when you tension it to the correct tension, the rectangle will become a square.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you start from the fingertips, wrap basically all the way up the limb as far as you can go, and then you mark where the bite side is and then put the time on it. And they're designed to basically compress the lymphatic flow, because that's where the venom travels, is in the lymphatic system as opposed to the blood, unless you're unlucky. But most of the time, they're going to inject you into the just under the skin. So if you compress the lymphatic system, then it doesn't spread, and it's so effective. Like a lot of the times when guys get bitten, they'll turn up to the hospital and they'll be basically symptom free, and then everyone kind of thinks, oh, maybe it's a dry bite, and as soon as they unwrap the bandage, boom. And
Wow.
I actually know a guy who got bitten by a Western brown. It was wrapped. He went to the hospital, and it wasn't until he was symptom free. As soon as they unwrapped the bandage, within a minute, he went into cardiac arrest.
Holy
Just
cow.
boof like that.
Wow.
Because they did bloods and they were like, it's all normal, it might have been a dry bite, all of this sort of thing. Unwrap the bandage, literally within a minute, boom, cardiac arrest. And yeah, his heart stopped, I think, 3 times. But he's alive. Yeah.
Wow. So those
Full
pressure
on.
bandages are incredible.
They're amazing. Honestly, they truly save people's lives. Yeah.
So what happened to him after that? Did they get him anti-venom or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he had to have anti-venom, and he was in hospital. I'm not sure for how long, probably a week or so. So he was quite sick.
Jeez. And is there any tissue loss with that, or is it just it goes for your circulatory system and shuts down your heart?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know enough about all the individual venoms, if I'm honest. I know that some of them do have cytotoxic properties, which would obviously you'd lose your tissue more. But I believe the Western Browns, I think they're more of a combined hemotoxin predominant, and I think they probably have some neurotoxin in them. A lot of the Aussie elapids do. But yeah, definitely hemotoxin, not sure about neurotoxin and cytotoxin, but it's definitely a nasty venom.
Yeah, I've talked to people about vipers quite a bit, and it's like those you can't put any kind of you can't suck the venom out. You can't use a tourniquet because you'll probably make things much worse if you used a tourniquet. And they have the saying, time is tissue, so it's like basically you just need to call 911 and poison control and, get your ass to the hospital as fast as possible, basically. And so with the elapids, that seems really cool that you have the pressure bandages. So I guess you just keep a cool head, right? And just put that bandage on and then try to get help as fast as possible.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think also, it's probably to do with fang size, right? Because like the vipers have quite decent sized fangs on them, and then they can just, they probably puncture in quite deep. Whereas the Aussie elapids have got quite small fangs actually, and so when they bite, they sort of just reach that lymph flow, and then it's fascinating just the differences, isn't it? And I suppose I never really thought about pressure bandages for vipers and stuff like that, because I've always just been like, oh, venomous snake, pressure bandage, you know what I mean? And they recommend it actually for the funnel webs too. So putting a pressure bandage on, same treatment as a snake bite.
What happens if you get bit by a funnel web?
Well, thankfully we don't have them here in WA,
Okay.
but they're sort of Sydney region, and there's a few species that run over the eastern states, and so they recommend the same thing. So if you get bitten by a funnel web spider, you do the pressure bandage and immobilization same way. So
Do you travel Australia a bit to herp, or do you stay kind of just where you're at?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say Australia. I've gone sort of up and down WA a bit. And I've done a lot of herping down around the Great Southern and a bit of the Wheat Belt, and obviously around the Perth area. I've done a bit up the coast towards sort of Kalbarri Way, Shark Bay. What other areas have I been? Sort of through also so sort of along the coast north of Perth, all the way up, and then the furthest north I've been by cars, sort of Coral Bay, Exmouth area. And then just recently I went up to the Kimberley for university, and we flew into Broome and drove through to Derby, and I was staying in along the Gibb River Road, which is sort of between Derby and Kununurra, for a week, and I went out to a few gorges and looking for olive pythons and blackheads and stuff. Unfortunately, I wasn't lucky enough to find an olive or a blackhead. I would have loved to, but I found a that was honestly, they were my goal species. I found an olive python shed right up the top of one of these gorges. But I couldn't find the culprit, unfortunately. But yeah, turned up a pygmy mulga, and I got a gold-faced common tree snake, so that was really neat. And then a whole bunch of geckos and frogs and unfortunately quite a few cane toads. They're a real problem up there now. They're really starting to come across from Queensland through the Northern Territory, and they're right in WA now, so they kill a lot of the native wildlife.
That sucks.
Yeah, it sucks.
What are some highlights from either that trip or any of your trips? Some cool species you found, or close calls, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I probably don't have too many exciting stories on close calls or anything, because I always tend to be quite careful with stuff. But
that's a good thing. Your wife will be happy.
Yeah, exactly. Self-preservation. So I think probably my highlight for me was finding the common tree snake. Like, out of all of the herping that I've done, like a gold-faced common tree snake, because they're so secretive and quite difficult to find. And
it's
I
funny
found
that they're called the common tree snake.
Exactly right. And because there's different phases. So there's like gold phases through sort of WA into the Northern Territory, and then it goes into kind of greens and blues, and there's blacks and some quite cool colour variations as you go sort of more east into Queensland. But where they're really common over in Queensland and stuff, and they are, don't get me wrong, they are common in the northern areas of Australia, like through the Kimberley and stuff. But trying to actually find them on the day, because they're so secretive and they look like a vine, they're so hard. And I had climbed up this gorge, and we'd swum in this big water hole surrounded by all these really cool. It's just like, I can't even explain it. It's an amazing spot up in the Kimberley. It was called Galvin's Gorge. It's just fantastic, and there's like 60,000-year-old Aboriginal rock art on the rock. Like, it was just mind-blowing. And so we spent some time just hanging out there, and we happened to be the only people there for a good sort of half hour, so we're just making the most of that. And then we walked up the top of the gorge looking around for things, and it had started to heat up and the day was getting on a bit. So there was almost like a false summit in the gorge, and then there was another waterfall, and then the actual top. So we actually walked all the way around to the top, and then we came down the first waterfall onto this sort of platform that overlooked the gorge, and there was just a waterfall running down past some vines. And one of the guys goes, "Oh, I'm just going to go and see if there's any tree snakes hanging out over there." And I was like, "Oh yeah, probably won't find any, you know." And then he goes, "Oh, Sen, there's a tree snake." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, let me catch it." So straight in underneath it, and I just plucked it off the vines, and that's definitely the highlight for me. That was such a special animal, because I keep them here in captivity, and they're really, really uncommon in the hobby generally throughout Australia, and even in WA. They're probably a lot more popular now than they were sort of 10 years ago. But yeah, that was a really special find for me. That's an awesome animal.
Wow. That's so cool. It sounds like a beautiful place too. Like that must just be burned into your memory.
It's just spectacular. And you can't explain it. Like, you've just got to go. You have to go. Honestly, that's a bucket list place to go. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. What about crocodiles?
Yeah, there's crocs there. Yep. But at this particular gorge, because the saltwater crocodiles don't go that sort of high up. So you get freshwater crocodiles around some of those gorges. There aren't any at that particular gorge, I believe. Well, we didn't see any anyway, but the saltwater crocodiles are further when you get sort of closer to the coast and into the kind of the lower areas with the what would you say, the lower elevation spots where they can kind of come up the creeks and rivers. But there's plenty of saltwater crocodiles through there, so you've got to be really careful.
Are they do they like view people as a food source, or are they pretty sketched out by people?
Oh, they'll view anything as a food source.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
so we've got the alligators here in Florida.
Yeah.
And they're all terrified of humans. I mean, you'll see the biggest alligator, and if you get within 20 feet of it, it's deathly afraid. Like it'll run off and, smash into the water and all that. But the thing is that when people feed them, that's when it becomes a problem, is that, a lot of idiots feed them chicken and various other things as a source of short-sighted entertainment.
Yeah.
And then you end up with these animals that just see a person and just assume, okay, I'm going to get something out of this, so let me go check it out.
Yeah.
So do you just not go near bodies of water?
Pretty much. And there's guys that do, the Aboriginal people, around those areas have been living, here for thousands of years, and they know where to go and what to do and stuff like that. It's just, phenomenal stuff. They've definitely got a lot more guts than I do, but, a lot of those big salties, if you go near them, they might be a bit wary of you and they might slip into the water, but you just do not go near the water because they'll absolutely chomp you without they wouldn't even think twice. They'd be like, yep, I'll take that. Boom. But
how
the freshies,
often does that happen?
I wouldn't think too often. Like, you don't hear of a huge number, but then you do wonder how many don't get reported because it is such a remote area of Australia. There's been a few croc attacks in, the last sort of 12 months scattered around in Queensland and sort of up through, Northern Territory and stuff like that. So it does happen. I'm not sure how many go unreported though, but it sounds... Yeah. Like what you were saying about the alligators sounds very similar to the freshwater crocodiles. They're a lot more timid. There's been a couple of recorded kind of bites of people, which, they're still a couple of meters long and they still have quite sharp teeth. So you wouldn't want to get bitten by them, but, unless they hit a major blood vessel or something, or a nerve or something, you're probably pretty safe.
Yeah, that is, people definitely get eaten by alligators, and, I don't want to missell that, but, or misspeak rather, but people get eaten. I know that, I think it was like a 2 or 3 year old went into some freshwater body of water, it was like Disneyland, I think, and got eaten, and it's just terrible. And there are stories of people gardening and things like that, and getting close to the water and then getting grabbed. So it makes you wonder if those animals were fed, or if they mistook. Who knows? How well they can see what's up at the bank. If they just see like a shadow moving and they think it's a bird or a raccoon or something like that. That's, who knows if it's mistaken identity, like what happens with sharks and things like that. It's, they often make a mistake and then they just figure, oh, well, might as well keep going,
Yeah. And I think, looking at the alligators, I feel like they very much have that kind of reputation of potentially, is it mistaken identity, those that, whereas one thing that's guaranteed about saltwater crocodiles is they just don't care. They want to eat you. They will just eat anything that comes within striking range. They're just phenomenal predators, just, millions of years old and just, amazing.
What is it that, like, what is their primary food source? Like, are they taking out kangaroos that are drinking along the water, or water buffalo, or like what are some of the indigenous species that they might take out?
Yeah, so up there you've got a lot of like massive cattle stations that are basically just huge, never-ending areas as far as the eye can see of just land that have cattle all over them scattered. That, you know, as you see in the, you know, on TV where they round them up with their helicopters and stuff like that, because it's just massive areas. And, you know, rivers that run through there, obviously when the cattle come down, that's a really common one for the salties. You know, wild pigs, kangaroos, wallabies. I know that through, you know, sort of the Northern Territory and stuff like that, you'll get water buffaloes, and then obviously wild cattle as well that have, you know, wild goats, all of that sort of stuff. And then, unfortunately, some people, like you said, will throw fish when they've gone out fishing with a boat, you know, and they'll fillet their fish and they'll throw the carcasses in the water and stuff like that. So, you know, I know that when we were in Derby, there was a quite a big salty that is sort of resident around the local boat ramp because, you know, people chuck fish carcasses out and stuff like that, and there's lots of people fishing off the jetty. And, you know, so a lot of the time people just are pretty careful when, you know, when you're launching your boat, you've just got to keep an eye on where you are and not go wading into knee-deep water, because they're just, you know, the water up there with the tides and stuff, like the tides are so massive and the water's just, it's looks like tea, milky tea. You just cannot see into it. So you wouldn't even know if there's a croc there. Yeah, honestly, it just, ugh.
Yeah, you can't even, you're better off just not going. At least like some of the water here can be somewhat clear, you know, and things, just having milky tea. Yeah. Ugh.
But then it's interesting, right? Because a couple of hours over, you know, you head across the Broome and the water's crystal clear. Like, it's beautiful. It's awesome. It's, you know, beautiful crystal clear water. There's still crocs all through there as well. But, you know, the difference is that you can sort of spot them when they're a little bit further away. But, yeah, there's definitely a lot of those little inlet creeks with the mangroves up north. Yeah, you just, I wouldn't be going near the water up there.
And they're huge too, right?
They're massive. Yeah, they're massive. They're just like, you've got no chance if one grabs you. They're, just gone.
So you guys have, you said wild cattle. That's kind of what I meant when I was when I said water buffalo. Obviously, but so are those like cattle that have escaped from farms and they've just kind of gone out into the wild and undomesticated themselves?
Yep, exactly. And then they're kind of like a hybrid crossbreed of all of the local farming cattle as well, of different breeds that have kind of been brought in and that are on the stations and stuff like that. So they sort of roam around. And then when you get up into the Northern Territory, you get the actual African water buffalo that are wild through the wetlands and stuff up there as well.
You guys have water buffalo?
Yeah.
Oh,
actually,
wow.
that might be. Sorry, I don't think they're African water buffalo. That's not true. I'm pretty sure they're Asian water buffalo.
How did they get there?
Oh, they were introduced to sort of like plough the land and stuff like that, and turn it into livable land, and then they just sort of ended up being released, and now they're everywhere.
Oh, wow, that's bananas.
Yeah.
You guys have all sorts of stuff going on over there.
Yeah, so those ones are dangerous. So if you're walking around in the bush up north, that's a different kettle of fish. Down here, you're fine.
Wow. Yeah, I'm assuming a male would probably take you out, right?
Yeah, even the females. Yeah,
really?
They're pretty. Yeah, they're quite aggressive. The water buffalo.
Man, yeah. Even just like farm cattle, and bulls. I was bow hunting for wild pigs on a friend's farm once, and I was kind of crouched down and hidden in this like bundle of palmettos, like little palms, you know?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I could hear breathing, and I turn around and all the cattle were just lined up staring at me because they thought I had food, you know?
Yeah.
But the terrifying thing was the bull just kind of came up, and here I am trying to appear as small as possible so I could, remain hidden. Yeah. And here's this giant bull like just coming up, and I was like, I don't know if he's just gonna just press me into the earth, with his head, or if he's just waiting for a treat, and he just had like this dumb look on his face with these big horns and just drool coming out of his mouth.
Yeah. Oh man.
It's terrifying.
And it's like, you don't really expect that they're so big until they're right there, and you're like, that's a solid animal.
Oh yeah, you feel like a toddler. You feel
Yeah,
like a
100%.
newborn baby next to
Yep.
them. It's absolutely terrifying. And they do whatever you want. Like I remember putting corn out to bring the pigs in, and they just come over and they just grab the bag out of your hand and push you
Yep.
around. Like,
Yep.
it's they're so I couldn't even imagine something that's feral, a
Yeah.
feral cow. That would be
Yep.
scary.
Yeah. They are.
So oh, sorry. I wanted to ask you a couple questions about how you do keep your and because I wanted to get into the temperatures on this. You had mentioned
absolutely.
the blackheads, keeping them hot.
Yep.
So keeping them hot during the summer and then cooling them down. Like what's your temperature range for blackheads during summertime?
Yeah. So what I do is pretty much their hotspot temperatures. So I keep mine in sort of 1.8 meter long enclosures. So they've got quite a good thermal gradient, obviously. Up the hot end.
Okay. So that's like probably about like 5 feet.
Yeah, it would be. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so pretty much up one end, they've got access to anywhere between 40 to 45 degrees Celsius.
Wow. Okay, so 40 to 45 is 104 to 113. Okay. And they actually use that? They get under that?
They love it. They love it. Really? Yep, they love it.
Now, how are you providing that temperature? Is it a radiant heat panel or is it an actual basking bulb?
So basically, it's radiant heat. So I've got a heat cord coming into the enclosure, and it kind of zigzags up and down, and then I've just got a tile, like a ceramic tile that I silicon on the top, and then I silicon around all the gaps. So obviously they don't wee and poo over everything as blackheads like to do. And and then with the 30-watt heat cord, it just warms the tile right up, and it kind of simulates. A lot of our Aussie pythons are nocturnal because obviously it gets so hot during the day, they come out at night. And blackheads, don't get me wrong, still come out during the day. So, they're not purely nocturnal, but they do love coming out, sort of in the evening. So a lot of their heat is belly heat that they get from termite mounds on the roads, like all of that sort of thing. Granite outcrops when, you get more in your stimmies and stuff like that further down south. So a lot of it's, belly heat. So for all of those sort of terrestrial, semi-arboreal species, I tend to give belly heat, and then I will provide UVB here and there. If I'm honest, I haven't found UVB to change the blackheads too much. I don't feel it, and same with stimmies. I don't feel that it's, and actually I'll group womas with that. I don't feel that it's made much of a difference to their behaviour or their kind of colouring or any of their habits and anything. So I sort of gave up on using specifically UVB. So I tend to go for just normal lighting now with the belly heat, and then some of the other species I'll keep UVB for. But yeah, with the blackheads, they get a really warm hot end, and then down the cool end, probably the coldest it gets in their enclosure, the ambient temp in the cool end's about 24 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so 75. Okay, so like room temperature. So it's
exactly.
So you're going from 75 on one end all the way up to 113 on the other end.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay, and they get on that heat and soak it up.
They love it. Like I've temp gunned it before. You've got to be careful of thermal burns. So that's probably the biggest thing. I definitely don't want to say to people, "Oh yeah, heat all your snakes up to 50 degrees and they'll be sweet." But it's about how you provide the heat, right? Like if you're providing like a heat lamp right down onto the snake and it's getting to 50 degrees, that might burn them if they touch it. Whereas with the ceramic heat tile, it gets quite hot. Obviously, it gets to sort of 45 degrees, but it doesn't get to that point where it's going to burn the animal. So that's the good thing about the wattage heat cord. It's all thermostat run anyway. I run everything. I run every single enclosure on thermostats because I just don't want to risk the
Sure.
things getting burnt. And they love it. Like, especially in the summer, they go up and they sit on the heat most of the day, and they might, you'll see, you can sort of tell when they've had enough because they'll kind of move half off the tile because the way the cord zigzags, sort of, 3/4 of the tile, or maybe 2/3 I should say, is quite hot, and then the last third's not too hot. So you can sort of see in the morning they sort of start there while it's heating up, and when it gets nice and warm, sort of towards the afternoon, they kind of shuffle down, and they'll go up and cruise around and have a bit of a wander. But they, being at such a what would you say, a species that lives in such a hot environment, they just love the heat. And if you can provide that heat for them, it's really good for their metabolism because they're quite a fast metabolism animal. And so they're used to being kind of quite nomadic in the wild and in such a hot environment. So I like to keep them lean. I like to keep them really warm during the summer. And then when you're getting into those cooler periods, because, up north where they live, they just get the 2 seasons, the hot, the wet and the dry. So down here, we obviously have the 4. So I just try to simulate in their enclosures what they would be getting up north. So I give them I don't really give them the humidity that they would get up north. That's probably the only thing I don't give them. But because they live in areas where there's a lot of sand and stuff like that, I think humidity is quite high in their termite enclosures and burrows that they live in, but when they're cruising around in some of the sandy plains and stuff like that, and the spinifex grass, it's quite dry, so I'm not too fussed about giving them a huge amount of humidity, and they seem to do really well. They love the heat. They when you drop it down into the cooler, so you're kind of simulating that dry season. I drop the temps down to 38 degrees to 40 degrees, so that's their hot spot.
Okay, so 38, still 100 degrees, so that's still pretty toasty.
It's still really warm. Oh, and I should say, in the hot months, they get 12 hours of heat. So 12 hours, the hot spot's going. And then as I transition into those cooler months, I drop it by an hour, every sort of 10 days until we hit kind of sort of midway through autumn. And then they get 8 hours at about 38 to 40 degrees. 40 degrees absolute max, because I want them to basically cycle. So I try to make sure that it's around 38 degrees, but I don't like dropping it too much below that, because I know that there have been guys that have bred them without kind of keeping the heat right up, but there's quite a number of guys that have had more success keeping them hot, and including myself. So I sort of drop them to that 38 to 40 degree mark, and then I give them the 8 hours of that over the winter months. And then as I see them, copulating, and then the female starts to produce follicles, as soon as she ovulates, the male comes out, and then I crank her back on to, I pretty much give her 20 hours of heat at that point, and I crank it back up to about 40 to 45 degrees. I set my thermostat pretty much at 43, so it cycles between, sort of that 40 to 45 degree mark. And she'll pretty much, cold end while she's developing follicles, and then as soon as she's ovulated, or she pretty much comes out, you can see when she's building, and then she'll ovulate and just stay on the hot spot. So they definitely like the heat.
How are you feeding them during all these temperature cycles?
Yeah, so this is actually a conversation that I've had recently with sort of a few people on the little Blackhead chat page that I started with, like Derek Roddy and stuff like that. So he jumped on, and we were sort of sharing ideas.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah,
he's going to be coming on the podcast soon.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, like I don't know him personally, but I've sort of nagged him with a few different questions in the last sort of probably 12 months or so. Great guy. Yeah, he's been awesome. He's really happy to share information, and we've had some really good chats about stuff. So he jumped on, and we were sort of discussing feeding regime, stuff like that. And I think the biggest thing with Asperdites, which are obviously your womas and your blackheads, is that they are naturally rodent reptile feeders in the wild. So here we it would be nice to be able to have disposable reptiles to feed them, but we just can't do that. So it's obviously rodents and poultry and stuff like that, and fish, if you want to.
I thought you were going to tell me that you're feeding them shinglebacks.
Oh, mate. I could never do that. I could never do that. Although I've got a story on that I will share in a moment.
Okay.
So, yeah, I haven't fed them fish, but Derek was saying he's fed a couple of his fish, which is really neat because it's not something that's kind of crossed my mind. But typically, during the really hot months, I'll feed the females basically every fortnight. I'll be giving them sort of a smaller adult rat. Everyone goes, oh, how many grams? I'm sorry, I haven't weighed the rats. I've weighed the snakes, so I can tell you what kilos that I'm aiming for, or we can convert them into pounds, but I can tell you what weight I'm aiming for in the females. But I don't. I just look at the rat and I go, yeah, it's not. It's basically weaned and it's an adult and it's probably just before their breeding size, so they're still quite small. As far as like they're not fat, but they've got a good, young muscle mass, and they've got good bone density at that age, and so they've got a better nutritional, kind of value compared to like a young rat who still doesn't have the muscle and the bone density, and then an old rat that's basically going to be mostly fat, and so that's what I'm aiming for the Asperdites, because they are prone to obviously hepatic lipidosis, so fatty liver. So I try to keep them on a combination of larger mice, and I might give 2 or 3 larger mice, or I'll give them a small rat, and that'll be kind of fortnightly to 3 weekly for the females through the hot months. The males will probably get fed once a month because I keep them quite lean.
Fortnight is 2 weeks, right?
It is, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, 2 to 3 weeks will be females, usually closer to the 2-week mark during the summer months if they're breeding, and then the males they'll get quite a lot less, so they probably get fed a relatively small rat, if not a couple of mice, once every sort of 4 weeks, and I mostly feed the males based on their body condition as opposed to like it has to be at 4 weeks, has to be at 6 weeks, has to be at 2 weeks. It's like, okay, what do they look like? They look like they could do with an extra couple of feeds, so I might bump them up the food size just to get a little bit of condition on them, especially coming out of brumation. But I keep them, I like to keep the Asperdites quite lean. So,
yeah, I mean, you see a lot of really fat Asperdites just on social media and stuff, where it's like, they get that like double chin look, where they get really thick. And I should imagine that them coming from the environment they're coming from, they probably squeeze every bit of nutrition out of every calorie they get out in the wild. So if you have them on a weekly feeding schedule or something like that, I could see them just getting obese very easily.
Yeah. And I think, because this was the interesting thing. So, I was talking with Derek and I sort of said, here's kind of the general gist of how I feed and stuff. And he actually said something really interesting, which I have never actually considered, but he's like, I feed mine more regularly, but I give them, I don't give them anything that would even show a visible bulge in the snake. And he's like, so I'm feeding far more regularly, but I'm feeding quite small, lean food items, supplemented with fish, so he's ending up with really healthy weight snakes, but he's feeding quite regularly. I think he was saying he's feeding, every sort of week, but he can get away with it because of the food items. So that was really interesting to me, because I was like, wow, that's cool. But yeah, so I might have a few things to kind of play around with some of my other animals, but at this stage, that's been how I've, been sort of keeping all my hatchies and adults and, the ones that I've grown up and breeders and things. And I just look more at condition, but generally speaking, it'll be about that. And then obviously when they cool off, as soon as I start reducing their food, their heat, then they I cut the food sort of around March, which is the start of it's like April, so it's the start of our autumn. And then as they come into winter, they get no food until they hit sort of as the temps are coming up, and obviously the females won't eat during their follicle development and their ovulation and things like that. But the males are usually not that keen to eat at that point as well. I find once the females sort of ovulating, then the males like, yeah, right, I'll have a bit of food again. The job's done. But yeah, then they come in, and then of course, once spring arrives and summer hits, they're into the food, and that's where I'm getting a bit of condition back on them. But I cycle them every 2 years. I don't like to breed them year after year because I've chosen not to breed my females every single year for blackheads. I haven't been breeding them long either, so I'm just trying to get longevity out of the animals and keep them healthy while I have my breeding projects as well.
Yeah, it seems like you're putting their health first, just based on the feeding regimen and all that. It seems a lot more geared towards longevity instead of just, getting eggs as soon as possible.
Yep, and that's kind of, that's definitely the way I like to approach the hobby and my animals is look at how long can I have them for and what can I kind of enjoy them, as far as projects go, as long as I can, and keep them thriving as much in captivity. So,
yeah, absolutely. What do you keep on substrate or paper?
Yeah, I have kept on all sorts of stuff. So I've kept on paper. I've kept on, playground mulch. I've kept on kitty litter, sand. All sorts of different stuff. So much. It's funny you asked this question. I'm genuinely just going through a substrate change as we speak, and I don't think I've changed substrates for probably 6 years. I sort of got to the kitty litter, like the recycled paper kitty litter, and I quite like that. So I stuck with it, and I've been keeping with that for about probably the last 6 years. And then the carpet pythons outside get playground bark, and then the hatchies get paper towel or newspaper. And so that's kind of the spread of what I'm doing. But I've just decided to start trying a product called Puriflake. So it's an aspen bedding that I had recommended to me by a couple of the bigger breeders here as well. And so I ordered some online the other day, and I'm yet to disperse it through the enclosures. So I'll keep you posted on how that one goes.
All right. The outdoor enclosure, what are the dimensions on those, and how are you putting the snakes together? Are they all? Actually, that was a question I had for the blackheads too. How are you pairing them up throughout the cycles and all that?
Yeah, so I tend to. So what I look for is I look for their pre-autumn slough, and then when they have that, then they'll shed their skin, food gets cut off, and then I go rightio, introduce the male to the female, and I'll kind of watch them for an hour or so and let them sort of the female start tail wagging and the male's kind of cruising around, and I'm like, all right, we'll leave them in for an hour, and then what I do is I take the male out, I pop him back in his enclosure, and I'll try and get the skin of another male and put it in, or what I'll do is I'll actually swap the males' enclosures so they're in the other male's enclosure, and then I'll let them get a little bit fired up for a couple of weeks, and then I pair them with the females, and then if I notice that they're starting to lose a bit of interest after a month or so, then I'll take them out, put them back in the other male's enclosure, fire them back up again, give them probably a week to 2 week break, and then bring them back in, and that seems to kick them into gear again.
Nice. Are you doing, do you have an incubator, or do you do maternal incubation?
I've actually never done maternal incubation. So I use incubators. Look, I reckon I'll probably give it a go maybe this year, and probably with stimmies, but I think I'm too paranoid about losing a clutch of blackhead eggs to the heat mat or something if they lay it in the wrong spot, which they probably don't, because I put lay boxes in there and they tend to always lay in the lay boxes. But yeah, I like to have a little bit more, whether I'm being too controlling or too kind of helicopter parenting, as some would say, and putting them in the incubator and watching them every day. So I think I've wanted to try it. I just get hesitant about egg binding. Well, probably not so much egg binding specifically, but more a retained egg. Like if a female retains an egg, they're called around the eggs and you don't know. And there's nothing that I would hate more than, ending up with a septic snake because I've not realised that they've retained one egg or something over the whole incubation process. But, whether that's being too paranoid, they are, they're masters of survival in the wild, so I'm probably being a little bit over the top, but that's just me and what I've chosen to do to date. But I've seen a lot of guys have success in their maternal incubating, so I'm pretty keen to give it a go, probably with a more simple species like stimmies to start off with and then sort of expand from there.
It's really incredible. I just had Jeff Croce on, and he bred some I think it was a diamond coastal cross, and he did maternal incubation, and he said that his ambient temperature in the cage was 80, and in the nest box, like the ambient temperature was 80, and the female would do that shuttering.
Yeah.
And he had a temperature probe in there, and she would get the temperature up to 95 degrees doing that shuttering.
Wow.
And yeah, and she would do it for, I forgot how long he said, so I'm probably going to get mistaken here, but it was somewhere from 8 to 12 hours. And he would he said he would see the entire box like shaking and shuddering. And as this is happening, the temperature is going up into the 90s, and then she would stop and it would go back down to like 82 or 84 degrees.
Man, that's incredible, right?
Isn't it?
That is so cool.
Isn't that nuts? And that's that's what he said. Like he's like, you kind of, when you do, maternal incubation, you just kind of have to trust the animal, right? And that they're built to do this. This is what they're designed to do is reproduce.
Yeah.
But it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And like, I think I have to buy into that idea more and just like trust the process. I reckon I'm going to give it a go with stimmies. I've kind of got to the point now where I'm like, I've incubated enough clutches to be like, okay, I'll still incubate a few, this coming season, but I'm pretty keen to let one of the two, probably one of my wild caught females, I'll probably let her incubate it with maternal incubation, especially with the new Puriflake I've got. It's a little bit more incubation friendly compared to the kitty litter substrate, because that just sucks the moisture out of everything. So
can you guys get coconut husk over there? Is that like a substrate? Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's called Critter Crumble. So I've kept on that as well.
I love all the names, Critter Crumble.
Yeah, I know, right?
It sounds so Australian.
Yeah. So, like, I've found it. Sorry, my phone is just ringing. I've found that pretty good as well. I used to keep on that too, but I think probably more from a cost perspective, it's a little bit pricier. So that's why I sort of steered away from that once I started keeping a few. But
for in my opinion, it's great for retaining humidity, and it doesn't seem like a lot of the animals that you keep are more arid, so it's not like you have that requirement. I've got jungle carpets, and I've got spotted pythons, so a little bit more humid, not quite as arid. So it makes sense. Like Aspen would definitely get the job done, and you wouldn't have to worry about mold or anything like that. What would you do if you did have to deal with egg binding? Like what's your procedure for that if a female did retain an egg?
Yeah, so I've had a blackhead female where one of my females, when she laid her first clutch, she was quite a small female, and she laid 5 eggs and looked pretty good and stuff like that. And then I took the eggs and put them in the incubator, and I just sort of left her because I didn't want to disturb her even more, because I'd already taken the eggs off her, and I know that you can see them kind of cruising around looking for where the eggs are, and I'd feel bad sort of taking off and stressing them out. But I thought I'll give her a night and I'll check her tomorrow. And I checked her, and she did have a retained egg. And I thought, she'll probably lay it. So I gave her the day, and it didn't really move further down. It was really high up. It was just behind the gallbladder. And so I thought, I'm going to actually, intervene here. Whether she would have passed it later or not, I'm not sure, but I just didn't want to risk it. And so I just gently sort of worked it down to the cloaca, and she ended up spontaneously laying it. I didn't even have to kind of help her force it out. So that wasn't so much an issue with obviously any binding or any, rupture of the oviduct or any sort of issues like that, thankfully. But I did, early on in my sort of breeding experience, unfortunately, I lost one of my female Simpson's pythons from egg binding. Man. I was just inexperienced, and I just didn't know. I didn't know what to look for. I was sort of waiting, and it hadn't actually been that long. And she ended up, egg bound and going septic. And by the time I realised something was wrong, and I got her into the vet and everything, she was already too far gone then, because obviously with reptiles everything happens so slowly, and I just genuinely didn't have the experience to know at the time. And it was a very, very steep learning curve and a very sucky learning curve, but I have not forgotten that experience. And that's why I'm hesitant to go down the maternal incubation pathway.
I get it. Yeah.
But that's just me, kind of dwelling a little bit on that. But, that's just going back quite a number of years ago now. So I think now I feel more comfortable with the whole process. I think, branching out, because, like you were saying, watching the female do her natural process of incubating, and that's why I keep carpets outside, because watching them naturally thermoregulate, go out into the sun when they need, go down into the hide box, or cruise around and sort of have a look and things like that. To me, that's the best way to keep them, is to do it as natural as you can. Obviously, I can't say that my enclosures are all natural and look like their environment, but I want to try and make it as comfortable for them and observe their natural behavior as much as I can, because that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. So that Stimson's, when she became egg bound, did she lay anything, or was it the entire clutch?
So she laid 2. And then the rest were bound. So I don't actually know whether because I didn't end up doing a post-mortem, but I wonder if she might have had a rupture in the oviduct or something, and then they got stuck, or it's just so hard to know what it was. I probably should have done a post-mortem, but at the time I was pretty gutted, so I sort of just ended up taking the snake home, and I put her in the, I know this sounds, might sound a bit morbid to some people, put her in the freezer, and I held on to them until, because we'd bought a house, but this house, we built it, but it wasn't built at that point. So I put her in the freezer, and I was like, when we move into that house, I'll, put her in the garden and plant a tree over her. So now we've got a token lemon tree that has a few of the unlucky pets over the years that have ended up underneath it. But it's nice because, in a way you can sort of just know that they're there, and I'm a little bit sentimental like that.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's morbid. I think that shows how much you care about your animals. So the blackhead that retained, you said that was 1 egg?
Yeah.
Okay, and you just palpated that out. Was that egg viable, or was it? No,
it was a slug.
No. Yeah. Oh, it was a slug. Okay. Yeah. Are they more likely to hold to get egg bound on slugs, or is it just a 50-50?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Okay. That's a really good question. I would also like to know, because, I suppose it's like kind of like what's coming first in the lineup, right? Like, I've had females lay slugs first, and then, a string of good eggs. And then I've had females lay, couple of good eggs, slug, couple of good eggs, slug, all slugs. And so it's a little bit random. And I think with this particular girl, she'd laid 5 cracking eggs, all were fertile, really nice eggs at the start. And then I thought, oh, okay, cool. She's, full clutch, no slugs, fantastic. And then, it wasn't until sort of the day after where I felt, and I was like, hang on a second. I was like, no, it's not the gallbladder. There's definitely something sitting there. And as I felt, I was like, it's mobile. So sort of worked it down. I would have, there's a part of me that's interested to know what would have happened. And I'm sure she would have passed it naturally eventually, but it's kind of like do I leave it and take the risk, or I could just kind of help her out? And it turned out fine. I just sort of helped her, but it's interesting because there's too many unknowns.
Now, what if you couldn't get it to mobilize? What would you have done? I mean, you obviously have a great vet, so
yeah,
I'm assuming you just would have,
yeah, I would have taken it into Luke. He's fantastic. He's been, I've used a few vets over the years, and he's been my pretty much like I really like the clinic overall that I go to, but there's a bunch of really good vets there, which is great. We're so lucky we've got a really good veterinary clinic there, and then he's specifically Luke's been seeing my animals for about 8 years now, and so he knows me, and I know him, and he knows all my animals and everything like that. So I'm fortunate in that regard, and so if I have any issues or I'm worried, then I'll book in with him and take it in, and he's great. He's he goes through everything nice and thoroughly, and we sort of come to a mutual what would you say decision, because I think for me a lot of the time I'm like I feel like I've got kind of the keeper experience side of things of what I've found that's worked with a bunch of animals over the time, and then he also keeps, so he's got some of that, but then he's got all that awesome knowledge from a vet perspective, and so we kind of put our brains together and we're like, what's going to be the best way to kind of manage this, not only from the best for the animal, but also what's financially viable for me at the moment, because I'm studying full time and these sorts of things. So that's something that we keep in the back of our minds. But I've just found him awesome to work with over the years. So
I'm so jealous of you. I mean, you've got a vet that is like, I mean, he listens to you and you guys talk things out, and he keeps as well. And so when you had the mite problem, how did you treat that? Did you because I recently I've learned about NexGard. Have you heard about this? It's pretty wild. So, I mean, it seems like having a vet like that's kind of open-minded, like he would be into a treatment like that.
Yeah, well, that was actually who I heard it through. So I think I decided in my wisdom to do a breeding loan with some carpet pythons, and it was just unfortunate. I don't blame the fact that I ended up getting a couple of snakes with mites. I mean, it happens. Sometimes things get missed, and it happens to all of us. But I got them, and thankfully realized quite early on that they had mites. Within I think 10 days of them being at my house. And I thought, okay, so what's going to be the best way to treat this? Because I had them in their own enclosure, but they were close enough to a bunch of my other snakes that I was like, okay, this could be a bad situation quickly. And so I was kind of looking around, and we had this like mite spray. You guys would have the same, I assume it's the standard
Proventamite.
Yep. And I looked at that, and also looked at what's the name of the Frontline?
Yep.
Do you guys have Front? Yeah. But I've heard some horror stories with Frontline where people have lost animals treating them with the Frontline. So I was really hesitant to go down that pathway. So I went with the spray as best that I could, which, if I'm honest, I'm not sure how well it works. And then we decided to go with a course of ivermectin for a few animals, and that cleared up a bulk of the mites, but there was still a few.
Was that oral? What was the method of delivery for that?
That was a very, very small subcut dose, so injection dose, and surprisingly small, because it's quite toxic. And so I was so nervous because I didn't know how they were going to respond, or if any of them were going to...
ivermectin can be toxic at a high dose?
I think so, yeah. Specifically to... I mean, I'm sure it could be toxic to a bunch of animals and things like that, but I only know that with snakes, because I read a few sort of... and Luke, my vet, had kind of suggested it was toxic, and I'd read a few articles that showed that it could be toxic. So, just from a cumulative perspective, so I was quite careful with that. I gave a couple of doses to a few snakes first. They seemed to go okay. So, and then I got to the point where I'd mostly gotten rid of majority of them, but there were still a few on a few animals. And then I happened to stumble across I didn't stumble, but my vet stumbled across this new paper that had come out with the Aphoxolana, which is the next guard. And he said, have a look at this and just see what you think. And, maybe it'd be worth considering. And I looked at it and I had a read and I thought, you know what, there's sort of, I think, I haven't read the article for, I think it was a 2023 article from memory, but I haven't read it since probably about 2023. Or start of 2024, and I believe there was about 50 snakes in Europe of variety of different species that they treated with the Aphoxolana, and one dose, 6 weeks, and it knocked out all the mites. Didn't have to clean the enclosure, and I thought, geez, that looks pretty good. So then I was like, that seems like a much better option. And, no deaths, no toxicity, no neurological symptoms, nothing following. So I was like, oh, that's pretty convincing. Good group there with 50 snakes. So I did a little bit of reading about the, I think it's like therapeutic index or whatever, where the treatment dose versus the lethal dose in dogs, and found that, even dogs that had taken, some insane, amount in comparison to the dosage, was like, I don't know how many times, I can't remember what it was. And the worst that happened was that, the dog had, vomiting and nausea, and I think got a bit of diarrhea. And I think, one had a seizure, and that was like, but they'd had like 30 times the dose or something insane
Holy
like that.
shit.
Do you know what I mean? So I was like, well, if a dog's taking, and I know that it's reptile versus mammal, you shouldn't really, extrapolate across. But I sort of thought, well, pretty good paper, seems pretty good in dogs. I'm going to give it a crack. So I got some little drug scales off eBay, got in, ordered some online, diced it all up, and dosed a couple of snakes just to see how they'd go. And the thing that I like too about the NexGuard is the plasma level peaks at 24 hours post dosage in snakes. So my theory was, if they survive through that 48 hours, then you can be happy that they don't have any acute toxicity from the dose. And then if you monitor them over the next few weeks for any signs of any organ failure, then you can be pretty happy that things are safe, which, I've dosed heaps of snakes with it now, and
Wow.
I've have not had a problem. It's eradicated the mites, and then I've recommended it to a couple of mates around Perth as well, and they've had similar success. So yeah, it's to me, it's a game changer for mites. It's
Why
just
isn't
awesome.
that a thing? Somebody needs to do that. Like, they need to market that.
Yeah.
And call it like Snake Guard.
Yeah,
and
totally.
the same company sell and just go around and sell that to vets to treat mites, and they can just do small dosages based off of however many grams the snake is, and so how did you deliver that? Did you stick it into a feeder and then feed the feeder to the snake?
Yeah, exactly that. And it's,
dude, it's so easy.
It's so easy. If you get like one of the dog chewables, you just cut a tiny little amount off and pop it in, into the mouth of the mouse or the rat, and just use your feeder tongs to kind of poke it into the, back of their throat a little bit. Yeah. Feed it to the snake. Boom, done. Dosage done. It's the easiest thing.
It's the easiest thing. It's the easiest thing. You don't have to worry about chemicals, coming in contact with you, right? You're breathing in. If you're spraying Preventamite, you're breathing that in. Your kids might breathe it in. You got to do it outside. How am I going to get these giant cages outside? Then additionally, I keep everything on cocoa husk.
Yeah.
With not isopods. Yes, isopods and springtails, right? So I'd have to destroy everything in my entire collection if I were to get a mite infestation. And you've got the best vet in all of planet Earth, to help you out with that.
Yeah.
But like the likelihood of me finding a vet to write that prescription, outlook not so good,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that, right? Like, I would think in like Florida, obviously, in the States, you guys can keep so many awesome animals and so much variety. I would think that there would be a pretty healthy vet industry for that side of things.
I need to find one. I have I'll say a decent vet, but he he also hasn't done any cultures on anything when I had an RI treated for a different python. So, it's kind of, I think I need to hunt around some more and like actually reach out and see if I can like get a vibe for the vet. That's the problem too, right? Is like you can't talk to him on the phone before you bring your animal in.
Yep.
So you don't know what you're getting.
Exactly.
And they'll say over the phone, well, we can't discuss treatment until you bring the animal in. So and then you go in and you have to spend your, whatever, $100 just to go in and see the vet. So it's difficult. It's really difficult shopping for a vet, so
absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that it seems like NexGard, that should be people are missing out on that. That should be totally marketed towards snake keepers, because that would be an overnight success. Everybody would love that.
100%. And, like I look at it and I think there's obviously issues around the world with treatment resistant mites, and how that's obviously been a growing problem with all of these topical mite eradication sort of chemicals, and then they've now become resistant to a lot of it. So now you're getting these like super mites, and it'd be really interesting to see how NexGard goes with those, because I think a lot of the issue with all of that topical stuff, and even with just the ivermectin dosage and things like that, is that you've still, because you're treating two different things. You're treating the environment and you're treating the animal. And then you've got to wash yourself as well, so you don't flick mite eggs everywhere. And so if you're spraying all these chemicals into the environment, the mites that are surviving that are then going to start to breed, and then you've now just got a whole string. You're basically like super breeding, resistant mites in your own collection. So that's what I love about NexGard, because when you give it to the snake, it's a one-off dosage and it covers them for 6 weeks, which eradicates the mite cycle. And I normally just do, look, the paper didn't recommend doing a follow-up dose. I chose to do a follow-up dose at 6 weeks because I just wanted to be certain that it covered the entire cycle and the enclosure without any, chance of it coming back. And the risks, in my opinion, were so low as far as toxicity and stuff to the snake. And so that's what I did. And as soon as I did that, everything. So I got on top of the mite infestation very quickly. Thankfully, I think it took me about 6 to 8 weeks, and everything was pretty much out of the collection. So that was great.
That's so cool. You don't have to do anything to the house, to the cages, to yourself, and I've heard too that the mites reproduce parthenogenically. So like you could have just one random mite hitchhike home on you from a show, like it at least, we have reptile expos and everything here. So it's so easy to contract and then so easy to get rid of an infestation. So gosh, I wish we would just use our brains and I wish that would be like the go-to treatment for all the animals, for any snake that gets mites.
Absolutely.
Real quick, we'll start working on wrapping this up. I know it's going to be late there. You're ready to go to bed now.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a bit weary. I get the toothpicks out and split my eyes open.
I know. I forgot how late it is there.
No, that's all right.
What is your outdoor enclosure size?
Oh yeah, so
meters, please.
Do you know what?
I would convert that.
I would have to go and measure it again because I can't recall off the top of my head. But from memory, I believe it's about 2.5 long,
okay,
about 80 deep, and then it's, I think, 2 meters or 1.95 meter tall. And then I've just put a little extension out the side that juts out because I've got it under the alfresco. So I've got a little extension that juts out into the sun so that they can naturally bask, because the sun kind of goes like our alfresco faces, am I going to get my directions right? North. And so the sun kind of goes, east to west. And so they kind of get sun in that basking spot most of the day. So it works well.
That's awesome. Okay. So it's like, we'll say like 8-10 feet long, like 5-6 feet tall. And, and then, Okay. So yeah, that I'm working on something right now. I'm going to make it 2 meters long, a meter deep, and a meter high.
Yep.
And that'll just be for one diamond python
Yep.
to go live in for kind of temporarily, just to get him used to being outdoors and acclimated and everything. But I'm super excited to keep diamonds outside. I think it's gonna be awesome.
Mate, it's awesome. Honestly, watching them naturally thermoregulate in the sun and like, their colours brighten right up, and
Really?
that's yeah. Actually, that's one thing I want to mention. One of the coolest things about I'm not sure if it happens with the other carpet sort of subspecies throughout, but with imbricata, if you keep them inside, and this is how I knew that male that I got was originally wild caught and hadn't been in captivity long, because he was still beautifully bright. And what happens is, when you then bring the really bright ones from the wild into captivity, they notoriously just go dull and dark, which is really disappointing, because the whole idea is obviously, you got a cracking animal, that's what you want. But if you keep them outside, and I don't know whether it's the natural temperatures or the fact that they just feel more comfortable and they're less stressed, or if it's to do with natural UVB, there's a few theories that have been thrown around, and kind of coming back to the idea of all the little factors that kind of combine. I think there's probably multiple things that we don't really understand about them that and it brings their colors right out. They seem to be get into that natural thermoregulation, so they know when the sun's coming out and they do their thing just as they would in the wild. And it's just really rewarding to see the animals acting like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, now, yeah, you're getting me excited. I'm always excited about this. If I hadn't been working so many damn hours for the past month, I would already have my cage built. But I want to get it built and get some plants in there, and
Yep.
get it going for him. And I plan on moving him out there come spring. We're going through winter right now, so we're still getting kind of nighttime drops and everything, which I know the diamond would be fine with. But I want to make it as easy as possible for him. So put him
Yep.
out in the spring when it's as gentle as possible,
Yeah.
not too cold at night, not too hot during the day. And then he's going to go through our Florida summer, which, it gets, we don't get too hot, usually in the 80s to 90s, which I guess would be like mid 30s for you,
Yep.
and kind of, I plan on putting a misting system in too, so it'll be on a timer. So it'll
Yeah,
kind of mist
perfect.
him throughout the day a couple times, just to
Yep.
drop the temperature, give some humidity. Um,
That's
but
awesome.
yeah, I think it's time to let you go to bed.
No worries, man. Hey, look.
I do one more thing
Yeah.
before we go. If you could have any snake, any python, or whatever, take your pick from around the world, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I reckon probably. Oh, geez, that's so tough to pick. I want to probably go with either, and I know that this is a little bit boring because it's an Australian species, but I would love a green tree python. I just think they're
Oh, okay.
fantastic. But the one I would go for would be like a rainbow boa. What is it? Is it like the Brazilian or Amazon rainbow boas? What are they
Yeah,
called?
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Brazilian rainbow bows.
Brazilian rat. They are unbelievable. I reckon,
Yeah.
yeah, those are fantastic. I would love one of those. The iridescence on them is just fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, I meant to ask you before, when people get raided that have like illegal collections, do they
Mm.
talk about what was in the collection? Like if it comes up on the news or whatever, like, or wherever you're hearing about this, do they talk about what's in the collection? Are there any bizarre animals like South American species like boas, or is it usually just illegal animals from Australia?
Often it's a mix. So often it'll be illegal animals from Australia, but then I've heard of people with like boas. I think there
What?
were chameleons, corn snakes. What else
What?
was there? A couple of ball pythons. Yeah. So there's some exotics
That's
that. Yeah,
crazy.
I know. Like There
So
are
they're
some
out
exotics.
there.
They are, and I'm sure there's plenty around that people just don't even know of, obviously. But yeah, it's one of those things. I like to keep what we can keep and respect that side of things, because to me, I'm like, of course I would love to own all of those. I would love a boa. I'd love to keep ball pythons, corn snakes. Like there's chameleons. Absolutely, who wouldn't want chameleons? But to me, it's like I also just love the animals we have here, and I would hate to do anything that would end up getting them taken off me. So I'm like, I'm just going to do the things that I need to do to make sure that I can keep the stuff.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I am, there's definitely a part of me that's jealous with, all the species that you guys get to keep, and even the stuff that they keep over Easter. It's like, oh, I'd love to keep some of that.
Just move here to Florida with me and Derek Roddy.
I'll bring all my stuff over, and
I'll send you a shirt, one of my podcast shirts, if you send me one of your stimmies.
Yeah, absolutely. I might
solid trade.
I might have to deport myself. I'll bring the shirt, and I'll never be allowed back.
Have you been searched before? Like, have they shown up and gone through your collection?
No, I haven't actually.
Is
I'm
that
sure
common? Like, how often does it happen?
I don't actually know how often they do inspections, but most guys that I know have had their place, their collection, inspected a number of times.
Are they pretty polite, or are they kind of rude when they do it?
I think it depends on how you are, right? Like,
okay.
I think I've always had good experiences with wildlife officers when I've imported snakes or had dealings with transfers and things like that. I'm sure there'll be personality clashes, which is like anything in life, really. But typically, I've found them fine to deal with. So
that's cool.
You just got to be honest and upfront. Don't try to hide stuff. And I think that's probably where people maybe let themselves down, or they get a little bit like, funny about it. But it's like, yep, you've got a job to do. Come and have a look through, see what you want, those sorts of things, and that'll be it.
Yeah. So when they do find boas and pythons that don't belong in the area, do they euthanize those animals?
They do. Oh, it sucks.
That sucks.
It sucks so much, yeah.
Do you happen to know, like when if you've seen this come up in the news or whatever in groups, is it generally people that have these illegal collections? Are they also keeping in poor conditions as well? I know sometimes those things go hand in hand, or is it actually people that have a nice collection and just have illegal animals?
That's a good question, because they've never really released the husbandry photos that I'm aware of. So I don't know what the husbandry is actually like typically, but I mean, a lot of the animals that they euthanize, because they've sent, sometimes they've posted photos of some of the stuff that they've found, or, they'll put lists down, and the animals look healthy. They look well looked after, which is that's the worst part, because to me, it's like, it's a selfish decision, really, because you're going, I want these animals, but you're risking the fact that they're all going to be put down. So, to me, it's would be awesome, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it for anyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Asen, I'm so happy we made this happen. It was a great conversation, and this was a long time coming. I'm glad you upgraded your internet. We had a little.
Absolutely.
That's an inside story for us, and and we'll have to have you back on. We never got to that shingleback being eaten by a blackhead story, but we'll save that one for next time.
We'll save that for, absolutely. I just want to say thanks so much for having me, mate. I really appreciate it. It was it was great to have a chat, and hopefully it's content worth posting.
Oh yeah, hell yeah, man! Thanks for coming on. It was my pleasure.
No worries. All right, mate. Take it easy.